House, please be in order. Those persons not having privilege of the floor, please vacate the chamber. All members and guests in the galleries will please rise as we are led in prayer today by the gentleman from the 8th, Delegate Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, everybody. Would you bow your heads, please? Father, we thank you for another day that we can be in this chamber doing the work of the state, but more importantly, Father, we thank you that for such a time as this, you've called us to represent, and we want to represent you first and foremost. We pray, Lord, for continued wisdom from everyone on the floor. We thank you, Father, that we're guided by you in our decisions, and we thank you again for taking the time to love us, for loving us so much that you sent your Son, that we could be redeemed by his shed blood. Thank you, Father. In the name of Jesus we pray. And everybody said, Amen.
Please remain standing as we are led in the Pledge of Allegiance today by the gentleman from the 30th District, Delegate Adkins.
Would everyone make a pledge to the greatest flag of the greatest nation of the world? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members and guests may be seated. Reading the journal.
Journal of the House of Delegates, Friday, February 23rd, 2024.
Gentleman 34th, Delegate Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of the journal be dispensed with and that it be approved as having been read.
Gentleman the 34th, ask unanimous consent that further reading of the journal be dispensed with and it be approved as having been read. Are there objections? No objections are heard. Gentleman 96 for an update on the calendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Rules Committee met and moved committee substitute for House Bill 5180 and committee substitute for House Bill 5445 to House calendar, and we moved House Bill 5280 and House Bill 5194 to special calendar.
Introductions. Gentleman the 43rd, Delegate Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to announce that sponsored by the West Virginia Academy of Family Physicians and celebrating the 35th anniversary of the Doctor Day program.
Get glasses on.
Our family doctors today are Joanne Bailey from Pineville and Molly Cecil from Bridgeport. Please give them a warm welcome. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, for Nurses Day today at the Capitol, we would like to recognize the West Virginia State Capitol dispensary nurse who has been with the Capitol Police for 5 legislative sessions now. Please give a warm welcome to Nurse Elizabeth George.
The gentleman from the 50th.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, everyone. I'm proud to introduce a page to you this morning from Oak Hill Middle School, Miss Peyton Bowling, and she's escorted by her mother, Miss Brooke Bowling. So, Peyton, if you're in here, would you please stand up so everybody can recognize you? Also, I am very proud to introduce to you all this morning my family in the South Gallery, my mother, Becky, if they'd stand up, I'd say their name, my wife, Ashton, my son, Abel, my daughter, Marianne, and our 1-year-old Miss Charlotte Pritt. Thank you very much.
The gentlelady from the 49th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, the prestigious Jennings Randolph Award recognizes West Virginia high schools that host a student-led effort to register at least 85% of their eligible students to vote. Any high school that earns the award gets to nominate 2 students who led the voter registration drive to be recognized as honorary secretaries of state. Mr. Speaker, I am honored to announce that New Life Christian Academy in my district has earned the Jennings Randolph Award for the 2023-2024 school year. And in the audience today with Secretary of State Mike Warner is Principal Jessica Lucky, along with Dawson Brown and Elizabeth Underwood. I would like to congratulate these students, and I would like to ask them to stand to be recognized, and if you will make them feel welcome, please.
The gentlewoman from the 19th.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome, everybody. I have some special guests here today up in the South Gallery. I have some cousins joining us today, Julie Holzen and her son, Chris Holzen. If they'd stand up, Julie is joining us today from Nashville, Tennessee, and she went to school here in St. Albans. when they lived here. And Chris is here all the way from the Ukraine. He is a senior advisor for the Europe and Eurasia for the International Republican Institute. If everybody would make them welcome, I would appreciate it.
The gentleman from the 54th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see we're joined today by a couple of friends of mine in the West Gallery. First, we have Brenda Isaac, who is a longtime school nurse here in Kanawha County, all-around expert on public health. If Brenda would please stand up, and would the House please make her feel welcome? And there to her left is another school nurse from Lincoln County, Brittany Brogan, who is also a candidate for House of Delegates. Brittany.
The gentleman from the 40th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the North Gallery, and I would like to introduce Amelia Ingram. If she would stand up, please. Amelia Ingram. Miss Ingram is a Texas native here in West Virginia just for a brief period. She is a courageous young American who, from a distance, appears to be just a sweet young lady, but her boldness in serving others far outshines those looks. After the October 7th terrorist attacks on America, America's closest ally, Israel found itself in desperate need of military equipment. Miss Ingram, in conjunction with a group in Texas called Israel 365, bought military equipment from the United States and flew it to Israel just outside those active areas of operation. Just this week, she received a picture back of one of those helmets that they were able to send with a dent in it where whoever had gotten it on the Israeli side had been fired upon, and this helmet saved that Israeli soldier's life. And so Ms. Ingram is here today, and I'd like to introduce her to this House of Delegates. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 53rd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we have 2 pages from the 53rd District. They are accompanied by their teacher, Sarah Stover. The pages are Mary Joanna Stover, please stand, along with Andrea Grog, please stand. If the body would please make them feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 66th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I may direct your attention to the West Gallery, we have the presence of some members and students of Davis and Elkins College here with us today. We have Dr. Cheryl Schroeder, if you would please stand to be recognized. Registered nurse Sally Hamrick, if you would please rise, as well as some Davis and Elkins College students who are enrolled in the Bachelor of Science nursing program. If everyone would please make them feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 38th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a couple of pages to mention. From Mercer County delegates, we have James Fain under Delegate Gearhart, if he would stand and be recognized. We have his sister, Jordan Fain, if she would be recognized for me, and then their mom, Brandy, I believe is up in the gallery, if she would stand and be recognized, and House make them all welcome.
The gentlelady from the 73rd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the galleries with us today are nurses and nursing students from West Virginia colleges across the state as they take part in the Nurse Policy Summit hosted by the West Virginia Nurses Association. If they could all stand and the House make them feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 46th.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delegate Longenacre and I have a page today, if she'll stand when I call her name. Kinsley Cole, she's a 7th grade student at Eastern Greenbrier Middle School. Kinsley's here today with her mother in the South Gallery. If she will stand, Leanne Cole, will the House please make them welcome?
The gentleman from the 61st.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a group with me today that's very near and dear to my heart. Serving as pages is my son's senior government and history class from Elk Valley Christian School. We have with us today Corey Wilson, Wade Becker, J.D. Lawrence, Elena Moles, Colton Bartlett, Bailey Locke, and my son Landon Smith. They're chaperoned today by Mr. Mike Wilson. If they would stand and the House make them feel welcome.
The gentleman from the 33rd.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I have 2 pages with me. I think one's in the back right now, but it's Amelia Hager and Gabriella Collins, and they're here chaperoned by their principal, Regina Vance, and I think one of them's mother and grandfather's both up there. If the House would please make them feel welcome.
Introductions? Any more introductions?
Let's thank Delegate Hillenbrand. Standing committee reports.
Originating in the Committee on Education and reported with the recommendation that it be adopted, but that it first be referred to the Committee on Rules, is House Concurrent Resolution 88 relating to the Bureau for Social Services.
Report to be received. Resolution to be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 5351 to amend the definition of Commercial Solid Waste Authority and reports back a committee substitute, therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitute be adopted.
Report to be received. Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time.
Gentleman 96th asked unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time. Are there objections heard? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read the bill a first time.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5351 to amend the definition of Commercial Solid Waste Facility.
Bill will be advanced to second reading. Next committee report.
Your Committee on Government Organization has had under consideration House Bill 4721 requires surveyors to offer to record surveys of property. House Bill 5194 relating to requiring the Board of Pharmacy to promulgate House Bill 5192 relating to requiring the Board of Pharmacy to promulgate a rules. House Bill 5551 relating to continuing education concerning domestic violence, and House Bill 5632 relating generally to West Virginia Real Estate License Act, and report the same back with recommendation that they each do pass.
Report to be received. Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bills be taken up for immediate consideration and that the bills be read a first time.
Gentleman asked unanimous consent that each of the bills just read be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time. Are there objections heard? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read each of those bills a first time.
House Bill 4721 requires surveyors to offer to record surveys of property.
Bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5192 relating to requiring the Board of Pharmacy to promulgate a rule.
Bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5551 relating to continuing education concerning domestic violence.
Bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5632 relating generally to West Virginia Real Estate License Act.
Bill will be advanced.
Your Committee on Finance has had under consideration House Bill 4722 create a credit against the severance tax to encourage private companies to make infrastructure improvements to highways, roads, and bridges in this state. House Bill 5338 relating to the Consumer Data Protection Act and establishing a framework for controlling and processing personal data in the state. House Bill 5379 relating to financial assistance available for a prescription drug, and House Bill 5432 to move the essential functions of the Information Services and Communications Division into the Office of Technology, and reports by committee substitutes therefore, with the recommendation that the committee substitutes each do pass.
That report will be received. Gentleman from 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bills be taken up for immediate consideration and the bills be read a first time.
Gentlemen, ask unanimous consent that each of the bills just reported be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time. Are there objections heard? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read those bills a first time.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4722, create a credit against the severance tax to encourage private companies to make infrastructure improvements to highways, roads, and bridges in this state.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5338, relating to safe harbor for cybersecurity programs.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5379, relating to financial assistance available for a prescription drug.
Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5432 to move the essential functions of the Information Services and Communications Division into the Office of Technology.
Bill will be advanced.
Originating in the Committee on Finance and reported with the recommendation that it do pass is House Bill 5698, relating to the Consumer Data Protection Act.
Report to be received. Gentleman 96.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration and that the bill be read a first time.
Gentlemen, ask unanimous consent to take the bill up for immediate consideration and have it read a first time. Are there objections? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read the bill a first time.
House Bill 5698, relating to the Consumer Data Protection Act.
Bill will be advanced.
Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure has had under consideration House Bill 5331, relating to boating safety education certificate, and reports back to committee substitute therefore, with the recommendation that committee substitute do pass.
Report to be received. Gentleman 96.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration and that the bill be read a first time.
Gentlemen, ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration and read a first time. Are there objections heard? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read the bill a first time.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5331, relating to boating safety education certificate.
Bill will be advanced.
Your Committee on Technology and Infrastructure has had under consideration House Concurrent Resolution 47, U.S. Army Sergeant John Claude Roby Memorial Bridge, and House Concurrent Resolution 49, U.S. Air Force Airman First Class Willis Arnold Karakoff Memorial Bridge, and reports the same back with recommendation that they each be adopted, but that they first be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Report to be received. Gentleman 96.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the committee of reference and take the resolutions up for immediate consideration and that each be adopted.
Gentleman from the 96th, ask unanimous consent that the bills be taken up for immediate consideration, have the committee reference to the Committee on Rules dispense with, and that each resolution be put upon its adoption. Are there objections? No objections are heard. Clerk will please report the first of those two resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 47, U.S. Army Sergeant John Claude Roby Memorial Bridge.
The question is, shall the resolution be adopted? Is there debate on this resolution? Is there debate on this resolution? If not, those in favor of adoption of the resolution will please say aye. As opposed, will please say no. The ayes have it. The chair declares that resolution adopted. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next resolution.
House Concurrent Resolution 49, U.S. Air Force Airman First Class Willis Arnold Karakoff Memorial Bridge.
The question is, shall the resolution be adopted? Is there debate on the resolution? Is there debate on the resolution? If not, those in favor of adoption of the resolution will please say aye. As opposed, will please say no. The ayes have it. The chair declares that resolution adopted. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next standing committee report.
Your Committee on Rules has had under consideration committee substitute for Senate Concurrent Resolution 4, U.S. Army Second Lieutenant Eston Kuhn Memorial Bridge. Senate Concurrent Resolution 21, U.S. Army Master Sergeant James E. Jackson, Jr. Memorial Road. Committee substitute for Senate Concurrent Resolution 22, U.S. Marine Corps Major Cornelius Burdett Memorial Road. Senate Concurrent Resolution 23, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Louis Joseph D'Antoni Memorial Road. Senate Concurrent Resolution 25, U.S. Army Sergeant Wyatt K. Hinton Memorial Bridge. And committee substitute for Senate Concurrent Resolution 26, U.S. Army Private Clarence William Buck Holliday Memorial Road, and reports the same back with the recommendation that they each be adopted.
That report will be received. Other standing committee reports? If not, select committee reports, executive messages.
Senate Bill 507 was presented to the governor on February 23rd, 2024.
Message be received.
Communications from His Excellency the Governor advised that on February 23rd, 2024, he approved committee substitute for House Bill 4801, Senate Bill 100 and Senate Bill 171, and committee substitute for Senate Bill 354.
Message be received. Other executive messages? If not, Senate messages.
The clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has passed without amendment the following bills. Committee substitute for House Bill 4850, removing the sunset clause from oil and gas personal property tax.
Message be received.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5057 to raise the threshold for nominal referral fees from $25 to $100.
Message be received.
The clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has passed the following bills. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 167, establishing statewide health and safety fee for tourism and recreational activities by county commissions.
Message be received. That bill will be referred first to the Committee on Economic Development and Tourism, then the Committee on Finance.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 562, expanding employment and training requirements necessary for SNAP benefits.
Message be received, and that bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 603, Solid Waste Management Act.
That message will be received. Gentleman from 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration, that we dispense with the committee reference, and that the bill be read a first time.
Gentleman asked unanimous consent that committee substitute for Senate Bill 603 be taken up for immediate consideration, have its committee reference be dispensed with, and be read a first time. Are there objections? No objections are heard. Clerk will please read the bill a first time.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 603, Solid Waste Management Act.
Bill to be advanced. Next Senate message.
The clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has concurred in the House amendment and passed committee substitute for Senate Bill 668, increasing amount of certain controlled substances persons may purchase annually.
Message be received.
The clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has passed Senate Bill 712, reducing minimum age for state police cadet.
Message be received. Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be taken up for immediate consideration, that we dispense with the committee reference, and that the bill be read a first time.
Gentleman asked unanimous consent that Senate Bill 712 be taken up for immediate consideration, have its committee reference be dispensed with, and be read a first time. Are there objections? No objections are heard. The clerk will please read that bill a first time.
Senate Bill 712, reducing minimum age for state police cadet.
Bill will be advanced to second reading. Next Senate message.
Clerk of the Senate announces that the Senate has passed the following bills. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 746, modifying composition of Regional Jail and Correctional Facility Authority Board.
Message be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 778, amending certain qualifying offenses to enhance sentences of repeat offenders.
The message be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary.
Senate Bill 806, removing certain required reports to Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability.
The message be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Education.
Senate Bill 815, requiring annual analysis of contracts from DHS and Bureau for Social Services.
The message be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Finance.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 844, redesignating Educational Broadcasting Authority as Educational Broadcasting Commission.
The message be received. The bill will be referred to the Committee on Government Organization. Other Senate messages, resolutions.
House Concurrent Resolution 90.
Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and that each resolution be considered as formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system.
The gentleman asked unanimous consent that the further reading of resolutions introduced be dispensed with, and that each resolution be considered as having been formally introduced and referred to the appropriate committees as indicated on the chamber automation system. Are there objections? No objections are heard. Petitions, bills introduced, motions. Gentleman from the 21st, Dr. Cannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to be added as a co-sponsor to House Bill 5698.
5698. Is there space available on the bill?
Yes.
Are there objections? No objections are heard. Gentleman, to be so added. Other motions? Unfinished business.
House Concurrent Resolution 21, Louis Patton Memorial Bridge.
The question is, shall the resolution be adopted? Is there debate on this resolution? House Concurrent Resolution 21. If not, those in favor of adoption of the resolution will please say aye. Aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that resolution adopted. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House and the Senate. Next item of unfinished business.
House Concurrent Resolution 67, Kenneth R. Lucas Memorial Bridge.
Question before the House is, shall the resolution be adopted? Are there amendments to the resolution?
Delegate Cannon moves to amend the resolution.
Gentleman from the 21st, Dr. Cannon, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This just adds Sergeant Lucas's rank to the name of the bridge.
Question now is on the adoption of the amendment just explained by the sponsor. Is there debate on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. The chair declares that amendment adopted. The question now before the House is, shall the resolution be adopted as amended? Shall the resolution be adopted as amended? Is there debate on the resolution as amended? If not, those in favor of adoption will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the resolution adopted. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Is there further unfinished business? If not, bills on third reading.
Senate Bill 600, revising criteria for receiving re-enlistment or retention bonus.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 40th, Dr. Cooper, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of Senate Bill 600 is to revise the criteria to receive a re-enlistment bonus or retention bonus for the West Virginia National Guard. The bill strikes the requirement that eligibility is limited to members with 12 years or fewer in the service creditable for retirement, and allows the Adjutant General to determine eligibility for bonuses based on a member's satisfactory service, military training, and expertise, or the acceptance of a commission as an officer in the National Guard. This is a bill, Mr. Speaker. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on that question. There were 95 ayes, 0 nays, and 5 members absent. The majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Senate Bill 600, revising criteria for receiving re-enlistment or retention bonus.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 4855, require division of purchasing to write contracts in an unbiased manner.
Ladies and gentlemen, this bill was advanced to third reading with amendments pending and the right to amend. Are there amendments to the bill?
Delegates Burkhammer and Riley move to amend the bill on page 1 by striking out everything after the enacting clause and inserting in lieu thereof the following.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 64th, Delegate Burkhammer, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment just kind of goes beyond the initial intent of the bill, was that contracts could not be specific in regards to brand, manufacturer, and those things. After speaking with several colleagues, it was brought to my attention that there may be cases that it is advantageous for the state, and it would be in the best interest of the state to purchase such commodities or services of a particular name brand or a particular manufacturer. So this amendment addresses those concerns and lays out that criteria where you could deviate from that and buy a specific brand. Be glad to answer any questions. I urge passage.
You've heard the amendment explained. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, clerk will please read the bill a third time as amended.
House Bill 4855 required division of purchasing to write contracts in an unbiased manner.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 64th to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 4855 requires purchasing contracts issued by the Director of the Department of Administration's Division of Purchasing to be nonspecific in regard to the manufacturer or supplier of purchased commodities. The bill also arises by the amendment we just passed, the Director to authorize the purchase of a commodity or service with a specific name or brand on written request if doing so is in the best interest of the state. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Gentleman to 77, Douglas Statler. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 96 ayes, 0 nays, and 4 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 4855 required division of purchasing to write contracts in an unbiased manner.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4967 relating to the administration of the Voluntary Remediation and Redevelopment Act to provide new liability protections for persons and companies who wish to purchase and redevelop former industrial properties.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman the second, Douglas Teslow, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill applies to the Voluntary Remediation and Redevelopment Act. The Act establishes a program to remediate brownfield properties. At the end of the process, DEP issues a letter which is a conditional liability shield regarding environmental issues. This bill broadens the DEP authority to issue the conditional shield to prospective purchasers and innocent landowners, whether the property is being remediated under the program or not. This may assist innocent landowners and buyers to plan redevelopment projects before the remediation process is finished. Under this bill, the DEP may limit the liability of lenders, innocent purchasers, and landowners who are not responsible for the pollution. Applicants, however, must demonstrate that 1, they did not cause or consent to the pollution. 2, that they are not potentially liable through direct or indirect relationships. 3, that they will exercise care regarding the substances found at the site and that they will not impede the cleanup. In some cases, they will also have to demonstrate that they made, number 5, they made appropriate inquiries into the previous uses of the land, and either that they did not know the substances were released at the site or that they are a government entity who acquired the site by a cheat. Innocent contiguous property owners may be protected also if they are not the owner of the property where the release occurred and if they cooperate with the cleanup. These changes do not limit the Secretary, and this is important, they do not limit the Secretary from requiring those responsible for the pollution to clean up the site. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. There are 97 ayes, 1 nay, and 2 members absent. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4967 relating to the administration of the Voluntary Remediation and Redevelopment Act to provide new liability protections for persons and companies who wish to purchase and redevelop former industrial properties.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4999 creating exception to spousal privilege.
Are there objections to having this bill explained in lieu of having it read? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 51st to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill amends the West Virginia Code to expand exemptions to the spousal testimonial privilege to include cases where there are criminal offenses allegedly committed against the grandchildren of either spouse, minors as defined in 2-2-10 of this code, or any person deemed incompetent by mental disease, defect, or other disability. That is the summary. Mr. Speaker, I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there were 96 ayes, 0 nays, and 4 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4999 creating exception to spousal privilege.
Are there title amendments?
Delegate Fast moves to amend the title.
The question is on the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of adoption of the title amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5031 relating to human trafficking.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having the bill read? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 51st to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill amends West Virginia Code to provide that human smuggling, as defined, is unlawful. The penalty for human smuggling is the same as for human trafficking. It also adds to the list of aggravating circumstances. If an illegal alien, as defined by the bill, is a victim of human trafficking or smuggling, then restitution is paid to the state. That is a summary, Mr. Speaker. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? Gentleman from the 76, Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the human smuggling bill that we're talking about now, I think the thing that I would look at most critically about it is it takes a situation that relates to transportation of an individual, all right? Somebody who's defined in this bill as an illegal immigrant, and it creates a criminal violation and penalty that is just as severe as when any person is human trafficked, which is much different. Which, honestly, we're talking about the difference between a good Samaritan situation, somebody gives somebody a ride when they knowingly, I guess in this case, they know that that person might be an illegal immigrant, versus when somebody puts another person in a situation for sexual exploitation, for other types of damages that they can do to hurt that person, and we're going to make that exactly the same. That penalty is going to be exactly the same in each situation. And that's just a matter of fundamental unfairness right there. The second thing I think that's really interesting is that the person who has been not only smuggled, again, transported from one place to another, but the person that's been human trafficked now, in this instance, if they're an illegal immigrant, they cannot receive restitution, because this does not just apply to that one crime. This applies to the remainder of the chapter in the way that it's been defined. So you are somebody who has been hurt, really hurt, If you vote for this bill, you are taking the ability away from them to receive restitution like any other citizen or non-citizen right now has that ability. And there are very big consequences with that with respect to the 14th Amendment. I think that alone right there makes it unconstitutional. So that's an issue. Third thing, the saying is, I don't know if you know what this bill really does, because I think there's a lot of people who probably cheered when the governors of Florida and the governors of Texas sent a number of people who were undocumented to New York and to Chicago and these other cities. And if they did that to West Virginia, they could be held responsible for committing a crime, a felony crime, either 3 to 15, or I think it's 5 to 20, for doing the exact same thing that's been spread all over the news. And there's this one exception that then creates really a huge hole. And in places like the Eastern Panhandle, where again, we have drug trafficking, I'm sure we have human trafficking, and now smuggling, all you have to do is go that narrow stretch up that road. And I see my friends from the Eastern Panhandle all across this room. You guys know how that is, and somebody does not have the ability to be prosecuted. That makes no sense. In my opinion, this is just, it's a really inhumane way to look at a problem that we have with immigration, but in reality treating people, and I just can't support this. And I hope that if you really look at what the bill does, and look at all the problems that this isn't just going to cause in this cause of action, but with human trafficking, that weakens it, then I hope you'll join me and vote against this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the second, Douglas Teslo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, I think, is the start of a reckoning of something that this country has to come to grips with. It's very important for people to understand that the smuggling of illegal immigrants, such as what's happening along the border, in certain instances, is nothing less than the reintroduction of slavery to the United States. People basically are indentured servants who come here, and they have to give their money to whoever their smugglers are. I don't think this country can afford that. I don't think we need to go back to those days. God knows we've had enough trouble with that. It's something that I feel very strongly about, and I wish when we vote on this bill we all think about that. I don't think we can stand for a smuggler someplace in Mexico getting money from people that he basically beaten to the ground and basically come to an agreement, and if they don't agree, they could be easily dead. So I will be for this bill. Thank you.
Gentleman from the 54th, Douglas Pushkin is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman yield?
Yes.
I was looking through the bill to see if there was any sort of carve-out or exception for a professional driver, such as an Uber, Lyft, or taxi driver. I don't see it in there. Would this apply to somebody who's just doing their job?
In the definition of human smuggling, it means a person smuggling with actual knowledge that the persons being transported or harbored are illegal aliens. So if they actually know that the person is an illegal alien, then yes, this would apply to them.
So say they pick somebody up, they're getting off work, in course of conversation, they find out they're undocumented, and they don't immediately pull over and kick them out. They take the fare, they're guilty of this crime.
Well, all I can tell you is if they have actual knowledge that the person being transported or harbored is an illegal alien, they could come under this bill.
For doing their job. Okay, thank you, sir.
Gentleman from the 79th, Douglas Hanson is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I share the concerns of the delegate from the 76th. Several days ago when this bill was on second reading, I offered an amendment, which I appreciate the bipartisan support for that amendment. And it had to do with a carve-out or a loophole in the definition of human smuggling. That loophole says human smuggling does not include any person hired by another state who transports an illegal alien through West Virginia. I mean, it's a very explicit loophole. We had the opportunity to remove that, to turn this from what I think is a political stunt into a more serious bill that applies to anybody, any driver, any bus driver that's transporting illegal aliens knowingly through the state. I brought up the example last week of coming up through the Beckley area, but this is also a big area with a big issue with Interstate 81 through the Eastern Panhandle. And this is an explicit loophole. This is a loophole just big enough for a bus driver hired by the governor of Florida to drive illegal aliens through the Eastern Panhandle and not be held accountable. For that reason, I'm a no.
Lady in the 56, Doug Young is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Chair of Judiciary yield for a question?
Yes.
Thank you so much. My question's on page 1 in the definition of coercion. So it's more about the human trafficking side, not the human smuggling side. There's a new exemption for what coercion doesn't mean. So it says, doesn't mean the restraint of a minor or the threat of physical restraint to a minor by the parents or legal guardian if conducted in a lawful manner and for the purpose of discipline. So what if they are restraining their kids in a lawful manner, but it's not for a legal purpose, it's to traffic them?
Well, that would remove them from this exemption.
Wouldn't they have to prove the purpose, though? I'm worried that there's not a legal purpose, it just says purpose.
All I'm saying is it would remove them from this exemption. If they are doing this for the purposes of trafficking, they would not come under this exemption.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm a no on this bill for a lot of reasons. My friend's amendment that he tried on second reading I think is a massive loophole. I do think there's still a massive loophole in this coercion piece, and I also think this bill is incredibly unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. So for that reason, I'm a no.
Is there other debate on this bill? Lady in the 73rd, Douglas Summers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman of Judiciary yield?
Yes.
I'm just curious about the restitution piece that the gentleman from the 76 brought up. And so when I read that, notwithstanding any provision of this code to the contrary, illegal aliens are not eligible for restitution. And then the next sentence is, restitution shall be provided by illegal alien offenders to the state of West Virginia. So my question is, say you have Americans that cross the border, kidnap and bring back illegal aliens to traffic. So they're caught, they're prosecuted. That person that was the victim of that then has no ability for restitution just because of their status as an illegal alien, even if kidnapped. So a victim, they don't, because of they're an illegal alien, they can't get any? If you can just make that part clear for me.
The point of this is if restitution is to be paid by a trafficker or a smuggler, then it's not going to go to the victims, it's going to go to the state of West Virginia.
Instead of maybe that young female that was kidnapped and trafficked.
That is the way I read this.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman, the 51st, to close debate on the bill. If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there were 83 ayes, 13 nays, and 4 members absent. The majority of members voting in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5031, relating to human trafficking.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 11 o'clock, as is our customary time to convene. At this time, the chair will recognize any members who wish to make further introductions at this time. Gentleman of 37th, like Gearhart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Behind me in the South Gallery is a large group of nursing students from Bluefield State College, accompanied by the Director of Nursing, Sandra Wynn. Would the House please make them welcome?
Gentleman from the 40th, like Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Up in the North Gallery, I just noticed setting up there former Delegate Dave Evans, and he has a delegation of a couple folks from his county down with him. If all three of them would stand up, we can make them welcome. Thank you, sir.
Are there other introductions? If not, next bill on third reading.
House Bill 5039, relating to authorizing the West Virginia Division of Motor Vehicles to enforce administrative penalties for the civil offense of refusing a secondary chemical test.
Are there objections to having this bill explained in lieu of having it read in full? If not, gentleman from the 66th, Douglas Nestor, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The bill, as amended, continues to provide that an arresting officer shall submit certain information regarding the refusal of a secondary chemical test within 48 hours of the refusal to the Commissioner of the Division of Motor Vehicles and to the court having jurisdiction over the alleged driving impaired offense. It further provides that at the person's first initial pretrial conference or initial preliminary hearing, the jurisdictional criminal court shall conduct a refusal hearing. It further provides the form for that refusal hearing, provides for entry of a revocation order following a court-conducted refusal hearing, and thereafter alters obsolete language. That is the bill, Mr. Speaker, and I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on that question. There were 93 ayes, 0 nays, and 7 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 5039, relating to authorizing the West Virginia Division of Motor Vehicles to enforce administrative penalties for the civil offense of refusing a secondary chemical test.
Are there title amendments?
Delegate Fast moves to amend the title.
The question is on the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of adoption of the title amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5093, relating to revision of orders concerning distribution of marital property.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 44th, Douglas Kirby, to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. HB 5093 amends state code to remove some language that I think was incidentally left in there and cleans up specifically an and to, or an or to an and. So in the state of West Virginia right now, typically when divorce orders are entered, they are final after an appeal is filed and heard, if in fact an appeal is filed. But what has happened in our state and some of our family courts, and I don't fault the attorneys for this, but they have used the or within this provision to bring cases back 8, 10, 12 years later when parties felt like their case had been settled. And there are instances of modification of support, of spousal support, child support, and child custody in which the redistribution of the marital assets in the estates should be taken into consideration. However, it shouldn't be based on one of the three provisions within this code section. It should be done only when all three are met. And so this bill simply cleans up some statutory language and gives families and parties to divorce actions finality that they deserve. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 96 ayes, 1 nay, and 3 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5093 relating to revision of orders concerning distribution of marital property.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5105 to eliminate the vaccine requirements for public virtual schools.
Are there objections to having the bill explained? Do we have the bill read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman from the 51st to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill amends West Virginia Code to provide exemptions from the vaccine requirements for students. It allows private and parochial schools to adopt their own vaccine requirements rather than being bound by the state requirements. It provides exemption for children attending virtual public schools. Students attending virtual public schools and private and parochial schools must have required vaccines to participate in WVSSAC athletics. Finally, it creates a religious exemption for students. And I believe that's WVSSAC activities. Athletics, I said it correctly. Thank you. That's a summary, Mr. Speaker. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Gentleman from the 94th, Douglas Kump.
Would the chairman of the Judiciary Committee yield, please?
Yes.
A couple questions for you. Would this legislation, if enacted into law, deny any individuals the right to receive a vaccine?
Absolutely not.
Those who are vaccinated, what risk do they have for the unvaccinated?
You're getting into a medical question. I do not believe I am qualified to answer that question.
Good enough. Permission to speak on the bill, Mr. Speaker?
Yes, gentleman is recognized.
Full disclosure on this issue, my wife is an adamant anti-vaxxer. Now that probably, I would imagine, is because among her other illnesses, she has an anti-immune disease. Almost any vaccination or any prescription causes her severe complications, even to the point of death. I am not an anti-vaxxer. I received all my vaccinations from childhood up to adulthood. I've gotten my shingles vaccine. I get my flu vaccine every year. Received several COVID vaccinations. In fact, my wife and I, in 2020, I was vaccinated, she was not. Both got COVID plus pneumonia. And I've had COVID several times since then, even though I was vaccinated. The phrase that comes to me most is, we're here from the government and we're here to help you, whether you want it or not. This does not deny vaccination to any individual who seeks them. Those who don't want vaccinated, I don't believe should be penalized. And those who are vaccinated are not much at risk, if at all, to those who are not vaccinated. There's been some talk and chatter about this bill, about the First Amendment, about religious liberty, and I agree with that. There's other constitutional issues that are at play here. One is Amendment 4, the right of the people to be secure and their persons shall not be violated. I think this principle relies to this vaccine bill. Why should government mandates do this? This is a personal property, a personal liberty and accountability bill. I do not like vaccine mandates. I do not like them here. I do not like them there. I do not like them anywhere. And that's all I have to say about that.
Gentleman, the 25th, Douglas Hornbuckle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the chair of judiciary yield for some questions?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. I know you stated on the floor, and I'm reading here on page 3, there was an exemption for WVSSAC athletics, correct?
Yes.
And why was that exemption put in there?
Because it was amended that way.
Because it was amended that way?
I mean, you would have to talk to the sponsors of the amendment, but that's the technical answer to your question.
Yes, sir. Does this include band members?
I'm sorry, I can't.
Does this include band members?
Only if it's a sponsored athletic event.
So the premise behind it is athletics is because they're engaging with interaction with each other, I'm assuming?
There again, you would have to talk to the sponsors of the amendment, but I mean, it just clearly says what it says.
Okay. So it doesn't include an exemption for the WVCAT?
No. West Virginia Secondary School Activities Commission.
So what's the difference between those two bodies? I know they both play sports within our state.
I don't know.
Do you know how many hours a student has to take to be deemed a virtual school student?
I do not.
Okay. Okay. Permission to speak to the bill?
Yes, if the gentleman's finished answering questions, yes, the gentleman is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, yet again, this is another incomplete bill. Another incomplete bill, and I would urge that even to the folks who are proponents of this. Number one, we have to clear up some myths. It was stated here on the House floor last week, trying to make the connection between Massachusetts and that they have this exemption. Let it be clear that Massachusetts is the most healthiest state in our nation because of their health care reform, which is almost the same thing as the ACA, or as some people like to call Obamacare. They have over 99% of their children have coverage, and over 99% of their elderly have coverage. That is why they are number one. It has nothing to do with vaccinations. Number two, we are number one in the country for childhood immunizations. We rail in here on wanting to be number one. Why would we go backward? This is an area where we beat everyone else in the country. This is an issue. This is a huge issue. Not long ago, we had somebody from the Atlanta metro area went overseas that was unvaccinated, and they brought measles back. They brought measles back to the U.S., which was virtually almost non-existent in our country, and it started to spread. Legislation like this, and actually a Surgeon General down in Florida who has defied all health care policy and guidelines, they've had an outbreak down in Florida of measles. This bill is incomplete. It causes discrepancy between our student athletes in this state. I brought that up for a very good reason. We have the WVCAT. We also have the WVSSAC. They will play each other. They will play each other. And if you don't believe me, I have a really nice school down the road here on I-64, Tays Valley Christian. This year they played Wheeling Park, Nitro, Cabell Midland, Buffalo, St. Albans, and Spring Valley. So if they're not vaccinated, they're still going to spread it to the kids who are members of the WVSSAC. This is an incomplete piece of legislation. We also have a nice handout on our desk talking about non-medical state exemptions. I've got another map that would tell you that Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia all have cases of the measles now. We do not, because we're number one in childhood immunizations. It's very important to us, and we should still be number one. We shouldn't chip away at that. But I would suggest to you, if you would like to indulge yourself in the race to the bottom and not be number one, I would suggest that you buy a red cap and put on it, "Make measles great again." Thank you.
Gentleman from the 80th, Edgar Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chairman of Judiciary yield for a question?
Yes.
Appreciate it. Thank you. So the point has been brought up about health problems for those who would receive a vaccine. Does West Virginia currently have a medical exemption for vaccinations?
Do we currently?
Yeah.
Yes. Can you, what are you asking?
So
specifically?
if I had a history of a vaccine making me sick or ill, I had an allergic
medical
reaction to it.
exemption, yes. Yes.
Okay, so we do have medical exemptions
Yes.
currently? Okay, thank you very much. That's all I have. And to speak to the bill, thank you, Mr.
Gentleman is
Speaker.
recognized.
Thank you, sir. I've thought about this issue. It's not? Is it on now? Mr. Speaker?
Yes, gentleman is recognized. Is mine? Nope.
Check, check. There we go. Maybe
Hello?
that was a sign I shouldn't speak today, but I'll ignore it. As all important issues that we take up, I try to think about it from every single side, particularly when there are people who are extremely passionate about it. And I did that over the past year. I've been talking to some folks in my area who think differently than I do on the issue and speaking with them, but unfortunately, I just can't get there. This issue feels personal to me. A few people in this body have told me that they had my grandfather, John Williams, at WVU when he was a professor, and they always bring up, they say, why did he walk with that terrible limp? He never talked about it. That's because he had polio as a kid. He had polio. It was a life-defining thing for him, and I can't imagine bringing that back, and that potentially my son could have the same limp that his great-grandfather had from a disease that, well, we thought we had eradicated. We've been hearing about fetal cell lines, and just after looking a little bit, most medicines today are derived from the same line: Tylenol, ibuprofen, bismuth tablets. They all use that in testing. And I respect anyone's desire to have religious freedom. I certainly do. But I think when we talk about rights in this body, we need to look at it through the lens of how does that exercising of that right affect someone else. And when you talk about the First Amendment, religious freedom, I like to also think back to something that was said by our founders, that though not codified, not made law or in our Constitution, when they said that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when we pass bills like this, that the polemic scientific opinion says will hurt herd immunity, will make it so that more people will get measles, polio, and other diseases, that is certainly coming in on someone else's right to exercise their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As we look around these galleries today and we have young healthcare professionals, I'm afraid that they'll see this bill pass and wonder if West Virginia is the place for them to do their jobs. We had a bill 2 or 3 bills ago about implied consent. We talked about that a lot on the amendment stage on Friday. When you're a member of society, there is an implied consent. There is a social contract that there are things that you are going to do that you have to do to look out for your fellow man, your fellow person. Getting vaccinated is one of them. This is not a partisan issue, it's bipartisan. In fact, on May 20th, 2020, President Donald Trump authorized Operation Warp Speed, which scientists say was one of the fastest developments, faster than they could have ever dreamed could take place for the development of a vaccine. And we're going to knock that science, knock that had utility for our society. At the end of the day,
when so much overwhelming scientific opinion says herd immunity is a thing, I think we ought to respect that and keep our children safe. I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Lady from the 71st, Lady Kimball's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I speak to the bill?
Lady's recognized.
Good morning, everyone. So here we are. As you all know, I'm the lead sponsor on this bill, a little bill with a little change to a mandate. When I found out that public virtual school students also were required to have all of the mandated immunizations, I thought that the absurdity in the policy was evident. That is how this bill came to be. I must admit, when I first decided to run for this office, I did not contemplate this subject. It was after I filed that I found out that if a child is to attend a formal school, public or private, that child must be fully vaccinated, and that we have no religious exemption. I couldn't believe it. The more that I found out, the more I could not believe. We were one of 6 and are now one of 5 without a religious exemption. I couldn't believe it then, and as many of you know, I can't believe it now. We live in West Virginia. We live in the United States of America. We have rights, we have the constitutions. We acknowledge that we're guaranteed right to religious liberty. Yet, our West Virginia government has attempted to infringe on this right. I'm not anti-vaccine. I do believe, however, that the role of the government is not to give a false sense of security, but is to defend and protect individual rights. Last week, the gentleman from the 44th proposed an amendment to this bill, and that amendment generated a lot of discussion and debate. I supported his amendment, which expanded the reach of the exemptions contemplated to include religious exemptions. As I listened to that debate, I was troubled by much of what I heard. The sole point of the opposition to any exemptions is public safety. More specifically, we heard repeated arguments to the effect that herd immunity is crucial, so important, in fact, that the state of West Virginia should continue to use the force of law to coerce parents to have their children vaccinated, without exceptions or exemptions. Having thought about it further since that debate, I've determined that the reason for my unsettledness really comes down to this. The stated reason to require most vaccinations of children, public safety, which can only be achieved through herd immunity, is disingenuous, illogical, and ultimately contrary to what we claim to be most important. The public safety basis for mandatory vaccinations began many decades ago in response to diseases which were both highly contagious and highly lethal or debilitating. So the argument for imposing on the freedom of sovereign citizens to choose for themselves was based on real public health concerns. Mandatory immunizations were at least arguably necessary to stop or prevent highly contagious and highly lethal or debilitating diseases like polio and smallpox from killing or maiming thousands or tens of thousands of people. Somehow, over the course of decades, what began as a seemingly rational response to highly contagious and highly lethal diseases has become an irrational response to diseases that are not only not highly lethal or highly contagious, but are also diseases which many of us, our siblings and our friends, contracted and survived just fine. I knew dozens of people who had mumps or chickenpox when I was a child, but I don't know a single person who died or even was hospitalized. That this shift in focus and expansion of coercive medical procedures is severely out of line with our normal perspective on freedom and good government is easy to demonstrate. Alcohol, cigarettes, and poor diets, high in refined sugar and chemicals, undoubtedly cause far more death and chronic disease than the mumps or chickenpox ever will. Yet we generally, and particularly most of my Republican colleagues, work tirelessly to keep these activities and instrumentalities as free from government intrusion as possible. Most of us do so not because we necessarily think all those things are inherently good or because we even approve of them. Most of us do so because we are committed to limited government, freedom, and personal responsibility. We understand that those American first principles are what is crucial to maintaining the type of society we all want to live in. How we arrived at a point where we can defend freedom in so many other contexts, but struggle to defend it in the face of mandatory vaccinations is a question we should all be asking ourselves. Frankly, the contradiction gives cause to those in this chamber who have raised a question regarding whether many have become beholden to the pharmaceutical industry. I don't really believe that. I don't think those who would consider voting against this bill are necessarily doing it for nefarious reasons. Instead, I suspect there is a kind of inertia in play based in part on what would typically be a conservative proclivity for maintaining the status quo. But there's no doubt in my mind that this mandatory vaccination system is very definitely broken. And there's certainly nothing conservative about forcing any medical care or procedure on children. We should all acknowledge that to do so ought to be an extraordinary response to a severe and existing public health crisis. Instead, when it comes to our children, it's an ever-expanding business as usual. We only add to the list of vaccines. Once they're on the mandatory list, they're seemingly there forever, regardless of how much time passes and how diminished the diseases become in society. What we do to parents and children with respect to vaccine policy stands head and shoulders above any other policy scheme I can think of in terms of the arbitrary exercise of state power over its citizens. I know it's arbitrary because 45 other states have religious exemptions and don't have any health crisis as a result. I know it's arbitrary because cigarettes, alcohol, and unhealthy food products and poor diets do kill and severely sicken millions of people, but we tolerate them because in America, individual liberty is among our highest ideals. I know it's arbitrary because currently we are not concerned with requiring immunization verification at our borders as the migration of impoverished and malnourished people fled across, coming from countries lacking the luxuries of proper plumbing and hygiene. And I know it's arbitrary because we never consider imposing the same mandates on adults who aren't vaccinated. How many in this body would consider for a moment requiring new adult citizens who move here from other states to have a vaccine passport? I suspect none of us would. What is good enough for adults who move here should be good enough for West Virginia children. At a minimum, they and their parents deserve meaningful exemptions. We shouldn't take seriously the argument that this bill will result in outbreaks of serious diseases in West Virginia. The notion that a lot of parents will opt to exempt their children from vaccinations for diseases that are lethal or debilitating is silly. Vaccination rates and the lack of any serious problems in the 45 states that allow religious exemptions demonstrate otherwise. The fact is that most parents, in consultation with their nurse practitioners and pediatricians, will continue to widely vaccinate their children. We shouldn't pretend that West Virginia is going to suffer a wild polio virus outbreak if this bill passes. Based on recent events, I will admit that there could be a polio vaccine associated outbreak, but a wild polio outbreak is highly unlikely to occur as a result of West Virginia becoming just like the other 45 states and allowing a religious exemption. Thank you for your time and your consideration. I urge all of you to vote in favor of this bill.
Gentleman from the 27th, Dr. Griffiths, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad the nursing students are here. West Virginia is one of the least vaccinated states in the nation for ages 1 to 3. But we're number 5 in the nation when it comes to school vaccinations. 45 states do have that exemption. We have a non-medical or a medical exemption, but those 45 states that exempt those, that's all the more reason we need to not do this. What we're doing is opening a door that was closed. I told you about my friend in high school who had polio. He had natural immunity, he never got it again. I think about the only case I ever heard of tetanus. I mean, there's one to exempt for kids playing on a playground. Vaccines have erased these diseases from our memories. You don't see it, therefore it doesn't happen. Well, it will come back. It will come back as this national trend happens. It may be 8-10 years from now, but the gentleman from the 80th mentioned something that I want to reiterate. Cell lines from aborted fetuses, and that doesn't mean an abortion as you think of it, could be just a natural abortion where a baby is lost, have been used to advance Tylenol, Motrin, Alzheimer's drugs, and blood pressure medicines. So you might have to put that on your list. And once again, the life expectancy in this country in 1900 was 47. In 1950, it was 59. In 2019, it was 79. Vaccines are one of the most overwhelming reasons that our life expectancy has increased. Now, the government telling somebody they have to have a vaccine. Well, the General Welfare Clause in our Constitution and in the preamble states the government can write some laws for the general welfare. Vaccines have been one of those things. Just like when you put your seatbelt on, you're going to put it on because it's the law. Who's the government to tell me I got to put a strip of nylon across my lap just to drive a car? It's because 58,000 people a year died in car crashes, and that has dramatically reduced that. I want to remind you of this, too. The median cost of a case of measles is $32,000. We're going to increase the cost of health care in this country and this state once we pass this bill. And COVID's been mentioned. There were 700 million cases of COVID worldwide. That was about the time that we had a 7 billion population, and 700 million of those people had it, and 7 million people died. Vaccines have dramatically reduced that and improved that. I think about this and I get it. I appreciate every one of you. You may not think so, but I admire you for standing up for what you believe in. But I also think about my classmate. I also think about these diseases are off our radar because of vaccinations. And the herd immunity is what protects these people that aren't vaccinated right now. And that will diminish as time goes by. And, you know, when we talk about the religious exemption, that really is a recent thing. I thought about that when we first started talking about that and kind of joked about how I've seen the movie The 10 Commandments a dozen times, and not once did Charlton Heston come off that mountain with "Thou shalt not vaccinate." And it's because God has given us the gift of knowledge. And as we have grown in that knowledge, we have found ways to reduce or eliminate diseases for the sake of our children, ourselves, keeping healthcare costs down, and suffering is reduced. And so I have a feeling how this is going to go, and I understand and appreciate every one of you for your convictions about why you're going to vote the way you are. But I'm telling you, I've seen personally, I remember watching in the news as a young child, about every 3 or 4 months, there'd be a local story about a child on an iron lung because he had polio and he had to be forcibly made to breathe. Please consider this when you consider your vote. This is not about religious freedom. It's about the government doing something that's going to save lives, the lives of our children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman, 76, Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So our vaccination laws are laws of general application. And really the language specifically in the religious exemption just states that a letter has to be presented that the child cannot be vaccinated for religious reasons. And if that's the case, the exemption's granted. And I've heard a lot about religion and really this don't tread on me type of idea, which I understand. I get that. Nobody likes to be told what to do. I don't like to be told what to do. But when you look at different laws that we pass, including ones that we've passed relatively recently, we have a duty as a legislative body to protect the public. Just because someone professes Rastafarianism doesn't mean that they can go and smoke marijuana, at least not yet. Last year, we made a change to the code that prohibited child marriage, at least most child marriages, even though that has been a practice in certain religious sects. Same thing, polygamy. We have laws outlawing polygamy, but we have religions that, at least in the past, have promoted that. We have speed limits. I don't know if I followed mine as close as I should have this morning, but we still have those for the safety and protection of everyone across the state. And in Sharia law, you know that the closest family member can actually murder, well, I guess it wouldn't be murder, but they can, against the victim, they can take action and kill somebody. But we don't allow that to happen because of a religious exemption. No. Religious freedom does not give us the right to harm somebody else. And when we have vaccination, immunization laws that we've had, and we've heard about being number one, the difference between that 95, 96% immunization rate and coming down to something less than that is the difference between having these types of measles outbreaks, having some of these diseases that we haven't seen for so long come back. And we have heard about, again, the data shows we have had better health outcomes, we have had longer lifespans over the course of time since vaccinations. So the idea that it's disingenuous or illogical, I just don't get it. And I don't see the proof other than, I think just, again, this knee-jerk reaction to not do something because the government tells you that you need to do it. And finally, I just want to say, so one of my favorite constituents back home, who's a school teacher, is getting very close to retirement. I'd like to think she has a couple more years in her to teach because she's a heck of a teacher. And she sent me a message and she said, you know, I'm trying to decide whether or not to go back. And this bill passes, I just don't know if I'm going to. And you know what? Good luck trying to find new teachers. And I know that might not matter to everybody, but that's a problem. Our school system is struggling right now, and we're giving another reason not to be a part of the solution in public schools to try to help and grow and make education a priority. Not to mention the effects this could have on a number of people who are more vulnerable. And for all these reasons, I am against this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 55th, Doggett Acres, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I stood in support of the religious exemption amendment, and I would continue to do so today and any day going forward. And the lady from the 71st, I think, was exactly right when she said that, we're one of only a few states that don't have it. We don't see outbreaks of these diseases across the country, and 45 other states allow this. Several other states allow for a personal objection. I wish this bill was only about a religious exemption, though, and it's not. And I hinted Friday that I do have an issue with the bill that has nothing to do with a religious exemption. I believe in that exemption, and I think it's appropriate. The problem I have with this bill is it carves out an entire class of schools in the private and parochial school provision of the bill as well. Public school students still must be immunized if this bill passes, unless they have a religious exemption or a medical exemption, currently just a medical exemption. I think that we are potentially creating an equal protection problem among schools because we'll have a situation where if a parent can afford to send their child to a private or parochial school, then they will not have to be immunized, but for a medical or religious exemption. I certainly don't want folks to fake those things or claim an insincere religious belief in order to get those exemptions. I don't claim to be an expert in every state's laws, but I have seen no states that allow exemptions based upon whether you can afford to send your child to private school. But I've seen where private schools can be forced to immunize if they otherwise don't want to. That's my first concern, is we're creating two classifications of schools here that can and cannot exert these exemptions. That entire classes of private schools will not have to follow this law, but public schools still will. And that ties into the efficacy argument because, as a lady from the 71st said, at least some vaccines are real and some vaccines work, and they actually combat real diseases. I completely agree that the entire COVID program in many ways caused tremendous damage to the public health narrative in this country. That program was disastrous on many fronts, including, I think, the financial and emotional blackmail of forcing children who did not need that vaccine or that therapeutic to have it. But that doesn't mean that other vaccines aren't efficacious. We know that the polio vaccine is real and that it worked. And that from 1951 to 1954, we had 16,000 plus paralytic cases of polio per year and almost 2,000 deaths per year. And after that vaccine was introduced, that number dropped to around 100 cases per year until it was eradicated in 1979. Now, I've talked to lots of folks. I realize there are other arguments people make that sanitation got better, healthcare got better. Those things all tie together as a correlation, but there's no doubt that the vaccine itself worked, which means that the efficacy of the vaccine is an issue when it comes to whether we are going to require this in all schools or just some schools. I'm not naive to the fact that vaccine injuries are real. They absolutely are. They exist, and we need to be mindful of those people and respectful of them. I know this going back 20 plus years. The first time that I became aware of the VAERS system was in the year 2005. When I looked at the data from, the Vioxx was not a vaccine, but that's when I went down this rabbit hole when I worked on a Vioxx case and saw frankly, the fraud involved in the approval of that medication and the FDA approval process. So I know that there can be manipulation of data. I know that there are problems with the system, but it doesn't change the fact that vaccines, on some level, do work. One comparison I would make is that Johns Hopkins recently produced a study in which they estimated that there were 250,000 to perhaps more than 400,000 people per year who die from medical errors in hospitals. If any of us received a phone call that one of our relatives was in a serious car wreck while we're sitting here in this house floor, none of us, I don't think, would say, don't take them to the hospital, because 250,000 to 400,000 people per year die in hospitals due to medical errors. I think we'd say, immediately take them to the hospital. There is some risk that a medical error will cost them their life, but that risk is much lower than if they don't go at all. That's the risk we're dealing with the vaccines that we do believe in. I'll call the traditional vaccines. If we want to have a debate on whether some vaccines should not be mandated, I think that's a worthwhile debate, which I think the lady from the 71st maybe hinted at. But that's not the same thing as saying that entire classifications of schools should be exempt completely from vaccine policy. while all of our public school students are still forced to comply with that law. We recognize the public health importance in issues like this. In this state, West Virginia Code Section 16-3D-7 still requires involuntary commitment for those who are suffering from tuberculosis and will not quarantine themselves or seek appropriate medical care. These risks remain real in some circumstances. I'll close by saying that the most conservative jurists in our history, including Justice Scalia, even once wrote in a U.S. Supreme Court opinion that the elimination of communicable diseases through vaccination became one of the greatest achievements of public health in the 20th century. That's from the Bruesewitz case in 2011. I wish this bill was only about religious exemptions. I would press green on it every day, because I realize that does not pose a significant public health risk, because 45 other states allow it, and they're all doing fine. And I believe that is a legitimate basis to raise an objection to mandatory vaccination for your child. But this bill goes beyond that. I believe does pose some risk to public health that I simply cannot support. So while I will always support a religious exemption, I cannot support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 54th, Doug Pushton's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chairman of Judiciary please yield?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Just for the benefit of those joining us in the gallery and the millions watching at home, I just wanted to go over a couple of changes that occurred, because as the bill came out of the Committee on Health and Human Resources, it was a very different bill. It only applied to students that were in virtual schools, and correct?
There have been amendments, yes.
And yet, if they were in virtual school but they wanted to participate in extracurricular or co-curricular activities, they were still required to get a vaccine. As the bill came to your committee, that's what was in there, correct?
Well, the original bill simply stated that virtual school shall be exempt from the requirements.
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
The original bill simply stated that virtual school shall be exempt from the requirements.
Yeah, it only applied to virtual schools.
Correct.
But they were still required, the students at the virtual schools were still required to get a vaccine if they participated in extra or co-curricular activities with public school or private school students. Would you agree?
That came through the Health Committee.
That came through the Health
Speaking
Committee.
of, the original bill did not speak of that.
But as you received it, the amendments from the Health Committee included
Yes.
that. And then in the committee, in the Judiciary Committee, then it was expanded to grant this exemption to students in private school and parochial school, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then we narrowed the requirement will only be for athletic activities. So it doesn't apply to band, chess club, science fairs, just athletics, correct?
The gentleman is correct.
Okay. And then when on the floor on Friday, that's when the amendment for the religious exemptions was adopted, correct?
Correct.
And that states shall. The parents present a letter, and and then that exemption shall be granted, correct?
It does use the word shall. You are correct.
Okay. So is there any way to prove that? I mean, there's no way to prove that the letter is legitimate. Anybody could go get a letter and say, this, I'm opposed to this, here's a letter, and then it says in law, they shall get that exemption, correct?
You have the amendment in front of you. It does use the word shall, yes.
That's the bill now. It's not an amendment. That's in the bill. So
correct.
Any letter, okay, all right. Thank you very much for yielding. As it was stated earlier, I think the sponsor referred to the bill as this little bill. This is not a little bill. This completely guts childhood immunization laws that West Virginia has led the way on for many decades, and the results speak for themselves. Other states that have granted these exemptions are now experiencing things that we haven't experienced for quite some time. Measles outbreaks. It was stated before, someone said they'd never heard of anybody dying of chickenpox. Well, I have. When I was in kindergarten, a girl in my kindergarten class was recovering from chickenpox, developed Rye syndrome, and died at the age of 6. You know, the religious exemption at the end is what really guts the entire bill, because there's no way to prove whether or not somebody actually has a legitimate opposition to this, or their religion is actually in opposition to this. They could just submit the letter, and then it says right here, that shall be granted. Shall be granted. All you have to do is present a letter. Nobody's going to check and see if they were actually in church on Sunday, if they're actually even a member of a congregation. Anybody that wants to get out of this under this law can get out of it. All they have to do is present a letter. There's no way to check it. So I'm just glad that we are running this bill today when we have so many nursing students, nurses, school nurses, experts on public health, other medical professionals joining us today. And I'm sure that so many of our colleagues went through the hallway and they saw somebody walking down the hallway with a white jacket. They asked them their opinion of this bill. I'm sure we all did this to reach out to the people who actually know what they're talking about, since they are, coincidentally, here with us today. As I stated earlier, if I wanted an opinion on public health, I would ask a public health expert. I would probably not ask an attorney. Now, when questioned earlier, the chair of judiciary admitted he was unqualified to answer the question. So, it was stated on Friday, if you want a question about constitutional rights, then ask an attorney. If I had questions about constitutional rights, I may ask a few of the folks in here. Judging on some of the bills we passed this session and previous sessions, probably not. Probably not. But I will quote a jurist who I think was pretty formidable in his knowledge of the First Amendment and the constitutional rights, and that's Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said, "My right to swing my fist ends where another's nose begins. We do not have the right to harm others. This bill does harm. Do no harm. Vote against it."
Gentleman from the 2nd, Douglas Teslo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, looked at this bill, and I basically have formulated my opinion, but before I did that, I went home this weekend. Went home to talk to a couple of people whose opinion I value deeply. One is my daughter, the pediatrician who actually did her residency work at Penn State Hershey and had some dealings with the people in the Amish community in that area. And the other was my son-in-law, who is a nurse practitioner, physician's assistant. Now, I can't remember all these letters, but it was a far-ranging conversation, and I basically told them, I want all the facts, I want to understand what this is all about. And, you know, if there are warts on vaccinations because of what stem cells were used, I want to know that. And they were pretty open about it. They actually said, yes, that did happen decades ago. Some of those cells are still used from decades ago. I understand that argument. I really do. But I also understand the argument of some folks out over in the community, the Amish community, who had one child die from encephalitis brought on by measles, and another one whose son will always have seizures because of whooping cough and that type of thing. And during the conversation, it came to me, these pediatricians, and I've heard from a lot of them by email, they have a genuine, heartfelt worry about children's health. It isn't about big pharma and what they're, you talk to them, it's not about any of that. They have the ability to help children, and when they see something happen because of whether they're vaccinated or not, that causes children a lot of heartburn and a lot of medical problems, It deeply affects them. It bothers them. And I got that very clearly. Basically, having understood and being a pro-life advocate as I am, I still have to say, if we can basically make children's lives better, we need to lean in that direction, and that's why I'll oppose this bill. So, thank you.
Gentleman from the 53rd, Douglas Pritt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Chair of Judiciary yield for some questions?
Yes.
So just so I understand this as to how this would apply to private schools. Now, could private schools still have the ability to have their own vaccine requirements?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. So if they still wanted to have a vaccine requirement, there would be no prohibition based on this law. They could do what they wanted.
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman from the 45th, Douglas Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm, for one, excited today. I'm excited that we have this bill. I'm excited for my friend from the 44th who put forth his amendment to this bill to strengthen this bill to make it more applicable for our people. But it's one of these times, and I don't get to do this very often, where I get to push a button today and I get to keep my word to my people that I asked to vote for me to send me down here. I didn't make many promises on the campaign trail, intentionally so. Promises a lot of times makes a liar out of you when you get down here, when you don't do what you say you're going to do. But I did say I'd be a conservative voice, and I did say that I would fight for religious freedom in this state. As I see it, the root of this discussion today is, what does your individual religious liberty mean to you? I know what it means to me. What does it mean to you? My colleague mentioned the Ten Commandments earlier in a joking way. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That was what was on one of those tablets he was talking about. Well, how about the God of government? I don't see the God of government coming before the Lord thy God. Now, the good thing is, and the beautiful thing about our country and our state, is you don't have to believe that. You do not have to believe that. And that's a great thing. That's what makes us the greatest place on this planet to live. We don't have to agree on religion. There's folks that don't have any religion. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. But I know what my religion means to me. Now, the question I would ask you is, as a religious person, it's kind of who this is geared toward, what would the government have to do to cause you to say, I will not do that? That violates my religious beliefs. What does that look like? There's 100 of us in here. That's probably 100 different things. I do know during the COVID year that New York and California, who also don't have religious exemptions in their state code, said, you know what? You don't get to go to church. We forbid you from going to church. You go to church, you're going to get arrested, or at least fined. Is that what it takes? Would you say I'm not going to obey that rule from the government? Possibly. But get in your mind right now what it would be that would cause you to say, I will not do that because it violates my religious belief. Whatever that is, whatever that looks like, however major or minor that is, in your mind right now, think what that would be. Well, guess what? This is that issue to some of our constituents. Whatever is in your mind is this issue for some of our constituents. Now, that number is going to be small. Most of us, our religious beliefs and background does not forbid this, okay? I get that. If you look at the other states, I did a little bit of research, somewhere between 1% and 3% of folks utilize the religious exemption or the general exemption in 15 of the states. A couple percent. Now, I've heard it been argued, and it was argued the other day, that there's no major groups that says you can't go that has this prohibition against vaccinations or immunizations. Well, to that person that had that argument, I would say, my religion is for me. It's not even my church. I love my church. I love my church family dearly. But I don't do what I do because of what they do. This is if anything, religion is a personal matter. It's me and God. That's it. My belief is one of these days I'm going to stand before that God, and I'm going to give an account for what I've done. I don't answer for any person in here. I don't even answer for my spouse or my children. I'm going to answer for me. That's how personal this is. Now, whether you think it's frivolous or you think it's a bad idea to do this, it really doesn't matter how frivolous you think this is, this issue about religious freedom as far as vaccinations and immunizations go. That is a personal matter for someone. And I told people I was going to protect religious freedom. I told them, one of the things I said I would do, I would protect religious freedom for the 18,000 folks that gave me their confidence with their vote to send me down here. The federal Constitution is pretty clear. The First Amendment, pretty clear. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment or religion. None of us have a problem with that. I would make an argument for the Baptists, but nobody has an argument for that. Or prohibit the free exercise thereof. Uh-oh. We got a problem. Now, I think it was in 1940, there was a law that came down from the judiciary folks that said the federal law, because of some equality issues, and I think it's the 14th Amendment, the federal Constitution applies to the states. So basically, the federal Constitution is now the state Constitution. Now, I've got the state Constitution, our state Constitution right here. This section is called Religious Freedom Guaranteed. Hold on a second. What if I have a problem with this? Religious freedom guaranteed in our state Constitution. We already know what the federal Constitution says, and we can just substitute in. The West Virginia legislature shall make no law prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Well, as the famous saying goes, Houston, we've got a problem. Now, this is a problem that's been addressed by 45 other states. 45 other states had the sense to say, you know what, the Constitution's right. People do have a religious freedom. And this freedom that we have of religion is not from the government. There are certain things that's laid out as inalienable or unalienable rights. We've gotten all too comfortable with going with our hat in the hand to government agencies and saying, Mother, may I? Will you allow me to do this? We've gotten all too comfortable with that. And in this issue, we've gotten comfortable with it. I was speaking with my mother last night talking about this issue. She said when she was a little girl and went to school, they was given the vaccines. This goes back a long way in our state. We got used to it. This is what we do. We didn't really give a whole lot of thought to it. We should have, but we didn't. So here we are. And this is something I will say to you. Freedom is scary to those who are used to being subservient. Freedom is scary to those who are used to being subservient. But freedom's what we seek. The folks that came over here from Europe, that's what they was here for, right? We want to practice our religion the way we think we ought to, not some state-sponsored religion that they had over in England or other European places. This goes to the root of who we are and what we say we believe. I'm support this bill, wholeheartedly support this bill. I'm glad to be able to speak on it. I don't really like getting on this microphone and talking, but this is something I'm excited about, and you should be too. We have an opportunity today to do something for our people. Many of us have signed letters or signed things that said, hey, yeah, we'll support this. Well, here we are. It's time to, put your money where your mouth is. The Constitution's clear, and even above that, we have an inalienable right to practice our religion as we believe it to be. And I'll close with this. The gentleman said the other day, and it was a quote, I think, from a German minister talking about the Nazis. He said, first it came from the communists. I wasn't a communist, so I didn't say anything. Then they come from the socialists. Well, I wasn't a socialist, I didn't say anything. Then they came for the trade unions. Well, I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the Jew. Well, I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak on my behalf. That applies to this issue because right now it's a minor issue. 1% of our people, if that, will utilize this exemption. But it's important to them, and it's important to us to protect them. I'm going to speak up for them. I'm speaking up for myself. I don't want my rights violated. One of these days it might be me. So I'm going to speak up for them until we can head this off at the earliest stages possible. 45 other states around here get it. Somebody mentioned about these folks up in the balcony. They might leave our state. Well, unless they're going to New York, California, or a couple of the New England states, they're going to go to a state that has this exemption. You ain't going down south. You ain't going to sunny Florida. You ain't going to go down to any of the southern states and practice and get away from this. So this is a great opportunity for us today. I'm so glad we're running this bill. I want to thank my colleague from the 44th for his amendment to this bill that made it even better. Let's pass this thing, send it over to the Senate so they can do the same. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady from the 81st, Douglas Hamilton's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I can do a vaccine, I do want to address the fact that those that are insurgent are not afraid of freedom. And to make that statement is grossly insensitive, especially since people of color suffered, bled, and died due to slavery. We were not afraid of freedom. What we were afraid of was to live in a society who proposed legislation and passed laws that kept slavery into place. So to say that statement to me is insane, especially when you have people of color in this room. No, we're not afraid of freedom. But to deal with vaccines, I just want to make some things perfectly clear. Vaccines, there are some things that have been mentioned today that are simply not true. And I'm so glad that nursing students get the opportunity to hear this. Vaccines build immunity. Vaccines do not stop you from catching the illness. That's why if you take the flu vaccine, you can still catch the flu. What vaccines do, and let me pause and say what I'm saying is backed by data. It's not backed by popular opinion. The effectiveness of vaccines is due to data that has been presented down through the years. It had nothing to do with sanitation, it had nothing to do with the moral opinion, and it definitely had nothing to do with the teachings of religious studies that has anything to do with the effectiveness of vaccines. The reasons why we see illnesses no longer exist is for one reason and one reason only. Vaccines work. They work. People, we have put billions of dollars into research to show and prove that vaccines work. So in 2020, America got the painful opportunity to see what happens when an illness comes into our country that was not originated here and is introduced to a mass of people who was not immune to it. COVID-19 opened up our eyes to show us that our bodies did not have the ability, and the reason why our governor every single day kept saying, we're gonna run to the fire, we're gonna run to the fire, is because the health czar, Dr. Clay Marsh, knew that West Virginia was not a healthy state, and we were surrounded by states that were succumbing to thousands of people dying. So every day he guarded us and prepared us. We had vaccination, those of us that actually work in our communities, we had vaccination events because we knew that if COVID hit our state, the potential of damage that it could do. COVID, we have one body and we have to take care of our body. And vaccines help us to fight off infection. It does not prevent us from getting it. We have to take part in that. We're responsible for that. And that is why the government put legislation and laws to mandate vaccines because there was illnesses that was coming in and wiping out our people and leaving devastating effects to our body. It's unfair to compare vaccines to alcoholism and to cigarette smoking. Now, if the comparison for alcohol and smoking was to addiction, then I would agree. But in 2020, when COVID-19 hit, we was in a national shutdown except for liquor stores in the state of West Virginia. Because we knew that if we closed liquor stores, it would cause people suffering from the addiction to alcohol to relapse. And those of us that work in a hospital knew we did not have the bed capacity to treat those suffering from withdrawal. So we left liquor stores open. Then we began to enhance where we had to carry around a card to say that we was a frontline worker because we had people coming across state lines to the liquor stores because they was having outbreaks of alcohol withdrawal. Every hand was on deck during COVID-19. It was necessary. Does vaccine injury result happens? Absolutely. The same way some of you may be allergic to a medicine that I'm not. So you may have a response to a vaccine where it could totally help someone else. So does that mean we exclude the amount of people that die from COVID-19 cannot be compared to those that suffered a vaccine injury? It's not in comparison. It's not in comparison. One thing that I understand is that we must be led by data. Now, anti-vax began to increase when there was a myth concerning autistic children getting autism from vaccines. And data began to debunk that. A lot of people are led by these conspiracy theories that are not backed by data. It's backed by popular opinion. Now, if we remove exemptions for vaccines, it may not affect us because we are vaccinated. Vaccines prevent death and it prevents hospitalizations, which is why the COVID-19 vaccine worked. We're no longer dying. This amendment is not about religious freedoms, it's not about rights. It's about a way for us to circumvent around the issue of vaccines. Every couple years, we introduce something different to chip away at the mandates that was put in place to protect our people and to keep us alive longer. We can debate and call it what it is, but at the end of the day, this is about protecting not only our children, because if your children catch something, they're going to take it home to the family. What's in the community will result what's in businesses. And we don't have enough child care to support the illnesses that will come. We don't have it. We don't have enough expansion in health care to cover the illnesses that will come. One thing that we do can connect so many different things that we're trying to push legislation to build our communities and make us safer. So we have to take careful consideration. And what's interesting is that I've received so many emails from doctors begging us not to touch anything concerning these laws. Talk to your doctors. Talk to those in healthcare. You know who was the most afraid during COVID-19? Those in healthcare. In my hospital alone, we created one floor to deal with just those patients. And in the first break, that entire floor quit. They quit. Why? Because they could not handle watching people die and suffer every single day. When a code is called and somebody's heart stopped beating, a minimum of 20 people rushed to that room. We did not have enough medical protection to keep us safe. We wore the same mask 3 days. We was allowed to change our masks every 3 days. This is the kind of things that we're up against. And when we start chipping away at these mandates on the basis of rights, we are putting our public at harm. We have to support health care. We have to support funding to eradicate these things. And as a legislation, we have to continue to enforce laws that will keep our people safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Lady in the 31st, I got Mazaki's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are here today to make a law that governs all people here in West Virginia. My name is on this piece of paper called House Bill 5105. These words in here are important, but they are not as important as the lives that these words will impact. We had quite a number of people petition us, legislators, for an injustice that exists. People are hurt by vaccines. Especially young people have horrible side effects. Some parents were like, oh, I want to just spread out the dosages that we have to take. But then you all say, oh, it's for the good of all people. We need to do this or that. I want us to come together and say, we are reasonable. We have to focus on parents' rights. We know the parents usually know what's best for their children. And they should have the right to do this in conjunction with their health care providers and all the nurses and everybody's there. Yes, we need to educate the parents. Like we have heard from the delegate from the 93rd, there are continents that are different. I am from a different continent. We have different health care standards. Some continents, they need more vaccines. And believe me, those people want them. But now we have here our parents, and we are taking away the parents' right to actually really take care of their children by telling them what they can and can't do. We should give our parents some credit that they have a brain and can choose what's good for their kids and what's not good for their kids. And we have the counties around us that have implemented what's in this bill already. Why don't we go ahead and give our parents the rights? God loves unity. We need to come together to have a healthy community. So please, vote for this bill.
Lady from the 19th, Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to bring up some numbers. So in 1962, we required 5 doses of 3 different vaccinations. In 1983, we required 24 doses of 5 different vaccinations. In 2016, we required and highly recommended, and I can say that because my pediatrician did to my kids, 72 doses by the time they were 18 years old, 14 different vaccines, and an additional 2 different vaccines that were highly recommended and pushed. In 2020, if we go ahead and start adding in COVID every year, we are now at 90 doses of 14 different vaccines and an additional 3 that are highly pushed and recommended. That's an average of 5 different vaccines a year. 30 doses of those just to start kindergarten at the age of 5. That's 30 doses. Our surrounding states, Kentucky has a religious and medical exemption. They have about a 1.7% opt-out rate. Ohio has personal, religious, and medical exemptions at a 3.8% opt-out rate. Pennsylvania has personal, religious, and medical exemptions, also at a 3.8% opt-out rate. Maryland has religious and medical, and yes, I said Maryland, and we know how tight Maryland is on rules and regulations and how much they like to control you. That's 1.9% opt-out rate. Virginia has religious and medical with a 2.2% opt-out rate. The only states without exemptions other than medical is Mississippi, California, New York, and Great West Virginia. And here in West Virginia, it is near impossible for a family to get a medical exemption. I have known many families who have tried, who have vaccine injuries, and they still cannot get those medical exemptions. As my friend across the aisle in the 25th said the other day, I trust our parents. You should too. I urge passage, Mr. Speaker.
From the 88th, Dr. Hillenbrand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It seems the more things change, the more they're the same. The underlying discussion here seems to be currently COVID-19 and the government's rush to force vaccines. For those that remember, 48 years ago, the government rushed to force a swine flu vaccine on 45 million persons. I was one of them. 6 weeks later, the government suspended that program, and a total of 362 patients contracted, and I'll probably pronounce this wrong, Guillain-Barré syndrome, GBS, which can cause paralysis. Fortunately, I didn't get GBS. I'm a man of science. I like facts and figures, and I believe in vaccines. I think I've gotten all of them, sometimes by choice, sometimes not. But there's a calculated risk versus reward in everything, including vaccines. As was stated earlier, Oliver Wendell Holmes said, "My right to swing my fist ends where your nose begins." Well, that quote works both ways. Consider whose rights are being violated if you don't tap their nose, but you inject them against their will. I personally get my vaccines. Presently, that's my choice. This bill, though, helps retain the rights for some. I will be voting in favor of this bill. Thank you.
From the 53rd, Dr. Pritt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, one of the comments I've heard today was a recognition by someone in opposition to this bill, the idea that, that yes, vaccine injuries do exist and they do happen. And one of the things that we talked about some in judiciary when this bill was in front of us is the fact that there's actually a vaccine compensation fund. This is a federal program. Well, why do you think that exists? It exists because there is such a thing as vaccine injury. This is a program where people are compensated year after year. Now, there's a cap of $250,000, and I think the reason for that is that fund could go broke if it were to be pushed further higher than $250,000. Now, the folks here might not like all aspects of this bill, but when I'm voting on anything, one of the fundamental things I'm going to ask is whether a bill increases or decreases individual liberty. This bill increases liberty. It helps protect the fundamental rights of individuals who are, in effect, religious minorities. That's what we're talking about here, people. We're talking about folks that might not necessarily agree with you, that might have a difference of opinion. I mean, the vast majority of the people out there are going to get their kids vaccinated. We're talking about religious minorities. And so, for those reasons, Mr. Speaker, I would urge support of this bill. It protects individual liberties, it protects religious minorities, and it ensures that we are looking out for those we might not necessarily agree with, but have, as far as they're concerned, a good reason to not vaccinate their children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 11th, Dr. Fehrenbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak to this bill.
Gentleman's recognized.
I spent a lot of time this weekend doing some research on this, and frankly, I concluded that there were two issues that I needed to be educated on. One was from a legal perspective as to what the rights are and what else is of consideration with respect to vaccines and disease. Because I feel that one of the key issues I have as a legislator is to look at, and frankly, as tough as this may seem, balance the benefits and the unintended consequences of the legislation that we pass. So,
spent lots of time, and I want to clarify one of the things, that in state code, there are 10 vaccines that are mandated of children. These apply with the amendment that we adopted last Friday to all children, not as originally developed in the draft legislation for those in public virtual schools. So every year there will be somewhere between 17 and 20,000 new children born in West Virginia, and their parents, not the individuals, not those children, their parents will decide whether or not they are to be vaccinated. We know that today, the vast majority, because of state law, those children are vaccinated. You can get a medical exemption. I saw it and could not find how many have received that exemption. We've heard comments on the floor that it's a difficult, challenging task to get that exemption, but nonetheless it exists. Individual freedoms are critically important. However, I recognize the duty to look at things like medical exemptions, like religious exemptions, and what that means. I fully acknowledge that there are 45 other states and the District of Columbia that provide for religious exemptions. However, as I delved into this, I looked at, well, what do mainline religions say with respect to vaccinations? Most religions support vaccinations. My faith does. There were issues early on about the use of fetal stem cells, but those have been overcome. They are not used in the current production of vaccinations. One church, frankly the Baptist Church, their official position, as I saw, is that the church does not impose decisions on its members regarding vaccination. Members are free to make their own choices on all life decisions, including whether or not to vaccinate their children. The Baptist Church does not have a theological opposition to vaccines, and most Christian denominations have no doctrinal reasons for being unvaccinated. Now, I mentioned the law was one of the things I looked at. The United States Supreme Court has already weighed in on this topic. In Prince versus Massachusetts, the court discussed the tension between freedom of religion and general laws affecting child welfare. The court found, and this is a quote, "A parent cannot claim freedom from compulsory vaccination for the child more than for himself on religious grounds. The right to practice religion freely does not include liberty to expose the community or child to communicable disease or the latter to ill health or death." End quote. So what do those other 45 states do? I'm not sure. I realize that today this is a serious, important topic for us. So let's look at the disease and, to me, the risk of this moving ahead as it is currently constructed versus the way that it is today. If we look back in time, in the 20th century, before vaccinations became widespread, the annual morbidity rate of the 10 diseases that our children require in West Virginia, almost 1 million children died each year. With the development and widespread adoption of vaccines, deaths by these diseases were reduced by 99.7%. Vaccines work. Yes, there are some children that have, reactions, and there are consequences. Another theme that comes up, building on that, is herd immunity. For many of the diseases, you need 80% or more herd or vaccination or immunity to achieve herd immunity. For tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, a vaccination rate of 80% is seen as adequate. For measles, it's about 95%. For rubella, a vaccination rate of about 91% is required. However, a child must be between 12 and 15 months old for the first dose against rubella, and then it's suggested that they be 4 to 6 years old before the second dose. So imagine you're the parent of a child that you need to find child care for, and they're an infant. And they're going to a child care facility where by law or by medical practice, their fellow children, their classmates, are not vaccinated. What is the risk to them? On Friday, we heard that the average number of children that are not vaccinated is 3%. I accept that. That was consistent with what I saw. We heard earlier this morning that, well, maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 3%. There are 10 states of those in the 45 where the vaccination rate or the lack of vaccination rate is above 5%. And in Idaho, it's 12%. We are not in Idaho, we are in West Virginia. But the question on my mind is, what is that percentage going to be in our great state? Is it going to be 1%? Is it going to be 3%? Is it going to be 5 or 12 or more? I don't know. If I knew that number, this would be an easy decision, because I would look at that and I would balance it against the risk of people that cannot get it for medical reasons, such as my near neighbor's wife, who has an autoimmune disorder that prevents her from being able to get vaccines. We've also heard recently about the outbreak of measles in Florida. At that school, it's reported that 11% of those students did not have the vaccine. There was an outbreak there. I don't share this as a fear-mongerer. I share it because I'm concerned. One other thing to consider. These diseases, other than polio, are still prevalent in this world. In 2022, the global measles deaths increased by 43%, and there are 136,000 children that died from measles. Hepatitis B contributes an estimated 820,000 deaths, with approximately 6 million children under the age of 5 affected. The vaccine for rubella was developed and began widespread adoption in 1969. And I dare say probably every one of us has gotten that vaccine, or like me, if I got German measles before the vaccine was available. In 1964 to 1965, in the United States, 12.5 million people contracted rubella, and that resulted in 11,000 women losing their babies, 2,100 newborns dying, and 20,000 babies being born with congenital rubella syndrome. That's a lot. You may not have followed all of that, but that basically was some of the information that I went through as I was trying to figure out where am I going to vote, how am I going to vote on this bill. And with that in mind, I'll just close by saying, without knowing what percentage of the children are not going to be vaccinated, I think the prudent thing that is going to influence my vote, and that vote is going to be no, is to safeguard other children in this state. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 69th District, Delegate Marple.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I spoke on this last week, and I'm going to speak on it again. We talk about Mountaineers always free. Yes, we're free. We have the First Amendment, and I'm exercising it here today, having free speech, as you all have. The Second Amendment. I've been a member of the National Rifle Association since 1968. I own many guns, and I believe you too, if you're lawful, can own as many guns as you want. I went home Saturday morning, turned the TV on, and the first thing I saw was a measles outbreak in the state of Florida. The next thing I saw was more immigrants crossing the border, being let into this country. We've reached a total of over 12 million, they estimate. It may be more, it may be just a few less. How many of these people have been vaccinated against any of these 10 vaccinations that are required by this law? I doubt if very many. I spoke with a trusted friend of mine who was a retired nurse, and she said, oh, definitely. Children need those vaccinations coming to school. But we're looking at a potential problem with these immigrants that have come into this country, unvaccinated. There's going to be outbreaks in places like Florida, New York, wherever they're going. And as I mentioned last week, last year, the polio virus was found in the sewers of New York. They tested regularly for viruses and diseases. So I am voting against this, and I urge you too to protect our children. These 10 diseases listed that are vaccinated have almost been eradicated. As a delegate just spoke, that most of these don't exist in the United States anymore, very rare, but there is a wave coming. So let's protect our children. Thank you.
The gentleman from the 44th District, Delegate Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just last year, actually, it'll be a year tomorrow, this body had before it the Religious Freedoms and Restoration Act. And 201, every Republican member not only voted for it, but supported it, unquestionably. When it pertained to your religious freedoms and your children's religious freedoms that are in the mainstream or in an Orthodox church, you voted to protect those rights. But some of those same members that voted for adults' religious freedoms throughout the state are now reluctant and openly speaking out against adopting religious freedoms and a religious exemption for the children of our state. What we're hearing today is a debate that probably should have happened well before. There's two issues at hand. The first is, are mandatory childhood vaccinations an overall good for public health? Some, represented in here, all three of these camps are. Some like vaccines, but not others. Some think all of them are great, and some think all are bad. And even when we have data to back up what we have to say, the skeptics will say it's skewed, and the proponents will say it's questionable. So no matter which side you're on that particular issue, reasonable minds can differ. And that's the beautiful thing about being in America. You can have a difference of opinion, and you get to exercise that right, thanks to our framers and the First Amendment. The overwhelming majority of delegates who are supporting this amendment, this bill, talked about how we're vaccinated. Our families are fully vaccinated. Our children are vaccinated. And we'll probably ask our children to vaccinate their grandchildren because we've determined, based on our personal relationship with our Creator, not what our church believes or what some doctrine in a book is written, but what we feel in our hearts and our soul is best for ourselves and our family. Yet here we are, asking this body to pass this not for us, but for the 3%, the marginalized. You know, we don't pass anti-discriminatory laws to protect the majority of people. So when we question whether or not this law is necessary because there's so few people who will actually use it, you've just answered the question. It has to be adopted because they are the super minority that are currently being openly discriminated against in our schools. Where do you have to have proof of vaccination to get into? Into this chamber? Nobody checked me at the door. Walmart? Nobody checks me there. Not even to get into a hospital. So yeah, religious freedom is alive and well for every person over the age of 22. But if you want to go to grade school, or you want to go to a child care center with your neighbors and your friends, your church mates, sorry, religious freedom doesn't apply to you. The second debate, which I've already covered a little bit of, is whether or not the government has the right to deprive children within our state of the constitutional right of a free and quality education based solely on their religious belief. And that's the question that's before us today. Not a number as to a percentage. I wish I had a crystal ball so I could tell if there was going to be 1.5 or 3.5%. The question before us is fundamental. It is whether or not we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are endowed by our Creator, not a pharmaceutical industry, not even a medical industry, but our Creator. And the answer that 97% of West Virginians will say is, I'm okay with vaccinating my children. I understand the arguments about aborted fetus cells, but I'm still okay with it because I've weighed those risks and those benefits within my soul, with my spouse, and with my family. But it's for the 3% that I'm standing here. The people in my district that right now are only allowed to have one income in their home because the wife or the husband has to stay home and they're forced to homeschool their children. Their children spend the night with their friends. They go to pizza parties with their friends. They go to arcades with their friends. They'll even get in a van and drive to Morgantown to a packed out basketball or football game at the Coliseum or Mountaineer Field. They'll stop at Tudor's. But then on Monday morning, little Jimmy gets to sit in the window and watch all of his friends get on the bus. Mommy, why can't I go? Well, because the House of Delegates thought religious freedom was just for adults, Jimmy. They didn't think it applied to the most vulnerable and discriminated citizens in our state, which are the 3% of children whose parents have a fervent religious belief that vaccinating them would cause them to violate. The Constitution question is, in some instances, a balancing act. And that's what the passage of the Religious Freedom and Restoration Act was about. What we said was when there's a fundamental right at issue, and the government says you have to do something or you can't do something, we put it through a test. The first test, is there a fundamental right being violated? Yeah. The second is, does the government have a compelling interest in executing whatever it is they're trying to get you to do or keep you from doing? And in this instance, the answer is yes, the overwhelming majority of vaccines are proven. But then the third and the most important test, and the question that's before us today, is that government action very narrowly tailored to effectuate it without violating unnecessarily our citizens' religious rights? As we sit here today, the answer to our laws is an absolute no, it's not narrowly tailored. We, and now 4 other states, thanks to a federal judge in Mississippi, are the only people in America that don't have the right to decide on a religious basis what goes into our children. This bill would change that. You have the opportunity, unlike any I've had since I've been here, to actually make history for the state of West Virginia. I would submit to this body to ignore the scare tactics and the fear-mongering, because I will tell you what's going to happen, because it's already happened in every other state that's passed this bill. You will have the same amount of unvaccinated kids a year after this bill goes into effect as you did the year before it went into effect. You'll have the same amount of vaccinated kids. The difference is going to be that those unvaccinated children will be welcomed into our children's schools and daycare facilities. It will correct the injustice that currently exists that burdens these children and deprives them of the ability to have the camaraderie and the social interactions that we all know is so important. Community is more important now than ever before in history. But I think it's even more important to the communities themselves that we're currently depriving them of having these kids in their classrooms who obviously have a different point of view than the rest of them. So not only would we be doing a great service by recognizing this right, because keep in mind, we're not giving them anything. We're simply recognizing a right that was given to us from our Creator. But not only would we be recognizing those rights for the children in our state, but we would be benefiting the communities in which these schools and these daycare facilities, where they lie, because we will make them more diverse. We will bring in new families and new children with different points of view, which is the beauty of America. So I would just ask you in closing, if you had the feeling like you did the right thing, that you protected freedom and that you protected the Constitution on February 27, 2023, when you voted for your religious liberties, please vote yes as we try to protect the religious liberties of our children and 3% of the families across this state. Thank you.
Gentleman the 14th, Douglas Foggin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak on the bill?
Yes, gentleman's recognized.
I won't speak with the fervor as my friend from the 44th, or the conviction as my friend from the 45th, or with data with my neighbor from Wood County. But if everyone will look at their desk right now, look at that little empty spot under the desk. When I was a child, I was playing in my great-grandparents' house, and there's a box about that size, and I asked, Grandma, what is that? It's my great-grandmother. And that was a box that my great-grandparents' parents packed every belonging they had in and came over to the United States from Germany. And I can't tell you what religious freedom means to you, but I can tell you what it meant to them. Every belonging that you had, just go ahead and put it right there under that and take your family and head off somewhere you have no idea where you're going or what you're going to run into. That's how much it meant to them. I'd appreciate a yes vote for religious freedom. Thank you.
Gentleman the 51st, close debate on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's been a vigorous debate, long, and I won't belabor this. I just want to tell you about, I attended a wedding this summer, and I was speaking to a fellow guest at the reception, and this lady was telling me that she had a perfectly normal child and had the child subject to mandatory vaccinations, shortly thereafter noticed an immediate change, and that child was injured negatively for life. I have here some statistics from the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Fund just since 2020 up to February 1, 2024, 4 years and 1 month, they've already put out $5,151,355,000. That's just in 4 years and 1 month. So there are injuries, there are side effects from these mandatory vaccinations. In addition to that, we have the fetal tissue issue that has been discussed in this chamber. So some parents do find this to be violative of their religious freedoms. Some do. And for those, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that this bill is a good piece of legislation, and it would accomplish what needs to be accomplished, and I urge passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Debate on the bill has been closed. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has everyone voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On this question, there are 57 ayes, 41 nays, 2 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5105 to eliminate the vaccine requirements for public virtual schools.
Are there title amendments?
Delegate Fast moves to amend the title.
The question now is on the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of adoption of the title amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5254 relating generally to the creation of mental hygiene regions by the Supreme Court of Appeals.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having it read? No objections are heard. Lady from the 73rd to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill was developed during the 2023 interims. The bill permits the Supreme Court of Appeals to restructure West Virginia's mental hygiene commissioner system. It permits the courts to employ full-time mental hygiene commissioners with statewide jurisdiction who shall serve regionally. Once a region is established, the current system goes away in that area. Mental hygiene commissioners employed by the court are required to be attorneys and shall undergo a training which will include an education on acute psychiatric cases, geriatrics, developmental disabilities, and substance abuse. This bill creates a temporary observation release process where an individual determined by his or her healthcare professional is able to be moved to a lesser restricted setting. The placement can last up to 120 days. Finally, it requires the chief medical officer to file a petition with the court if an individual requires a stay longer than 90 days. If the court agrees, it may extend for another 90 days. It limits a person to be civilly committed to no more than 120 days without a hearing to determine whether the individual continues to meet the commitment criteria. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is, shall the bill pass? Gentleman 42nd, Douglas Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to this bill. I think this is a bill that the Supreme Court has wanted to basically take away local control from our circuit court judges. Right now, your mental hygiene commissioners are appointed by the chief circuit judge in a particular circuit, and I was one at one point, and to me, the system was working just fine. If you look at what the Supreme Court is proposing here in creating this regionalization, we're talking about people in your own community, your own county, your own circuit, who they are going to have life-altering decisions, and we talked about this on amendment phase, that could take away their liberty for a very long period of time that can take away their firearms rights and other rights and take away their ability to manage their own money, manage their own property. And that should be made by a person in that community. And that's why I've opposed this bill the entire time. When they move to regionalization, you're going to have somebody in Charleston essentially making decisions for somebody in Webster County that they don't know, that they don't have any background with, and they don't have any accountability to that community as for the decisions that they're making. Mental hygiene commissioners were created a long time ago to aid and assist circuit court judges who were originally tasked with deciding these issues, who were elected. And it was controversial when we did that. You know, your circuit court judges were elected to take care of these problems, and that role got abdicated to the mental hygiene commissioner that was appointed by the circuit judge, and that was controversial when that happened. Now, we're taking it completely out of the community because there's some people that feel that we don't have enough mental hygiene commissioners, or we don't like the way that one mental hygiene commissioner acted in a particular circuit or whatever the case might be. But I really think this is, and I've tried to remind us as a legislature that we ought to maintain our role in writing the laws rather than judging men by them or enforcing them. I think I'm voting no today to remind the Supreme Court that we in here write the laws, and we in here are the ones who are in control of how the court system is constructed. And I particularly feel that this is taking away from our local jurisdictions, and I have to oppose it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question still is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Gentleman, the 51st, Douglas Fast.
Thank you. Would the Chair Lady of Health answer a few questions?
Yes.
So how many full-time positions would this bill create?
It doesn't say. They haven't determined what regions they're going to create.
Okay, so it would create full-time mental hygiene commissioners to serve in a region, correct?
Yes.
Are there any other, within those regions, besides the mental hygiene commissioners, any other full-time employees that are contemplated in this legislation?
There are none contemplated, and I don't think there would be.
And how would evaluations take place? Like, I would assume that would be by a medical doctor or a psychologist or a professional.
Well, social worker, I think your committee made some amendments to that. But you'll have your hearing and proceed as it usually proceeds. But this framework will make sure that someone is available 24/7. When I've tried to have hearings for my patients in the emergency department, and it's a Friday night, and somebody wants to play golf, sometimes they don't come in. So this would guarantee that someone's on call 24/7.
Okay, and currently, are there problems or is there any data that there's been issues or problems with mental hygiene commissioners either not being available when necessary or just can't get anyone to serve as a mental hygiene commissioner?
Yes, and those are exactly the problems we've been trying to solve over the last few years. This is an item that is on our agenda constantly because of all the issues that you're explaining. Someone might not be available. People don't want to serve because they already have full law practice, and so they don't want to take on something else. We have patients sitting in emergency departments over the weekend. They can't get the proper psychiatric care that they deserve. Sheriff departments are tied up because they have to sit with these patients because we're contemplating taking away their freedom. So all of those issues are why we've landed on this particular model.
And I noticed that the bill authorizes virtual hearings.
It does do that because of a length of time. If it's too long of a drive, and that would make it speedier, and they felt that that was acceptable, but it also does not prohibit in person if that is felt to be necessary.
So the virtual hearings are not mandatory?
They are not mandatory.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there further debate on this bill? Does the lady in the 73rd wish to close debate on the bill? If not, the question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. There were 78 ayes, 18 nays, 4 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5254 relating generally to the creation of mental hygiene regions by the Supreme Court of Appeals.
Are there title amendments?
Delegate Summers moves to amend the title.
The question is on the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of adoption of the title amendment will please say aye. Opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares the title amendment adopted. The title as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. For what purpose does the gentleman of 54 seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask unanimous consent to return to the second order of business for the purpose of introducing a former colleague.
Are there objections? No objections are heard. Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see in the West Gallery we are joined by former delegate Denise Campbell. Would the House please make her feel welcome?
Ladies and gentlemen, the clerk advises the chair that it was unclear as to whether we announced this morning that House Bill 5345 was moved from the special calendar to the House calendar this morning. So that bill has been moved to the House calendar. This time, the clerk will please report the next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5530 relating to requiring a hospital to disclose price and fee information for certain health care services.
Are there objections to having this bill explained in lieu of having the bill read? No objections are heard. Lady from the 73rd to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill is very similar to the adoption of a rule. We're incorporating by reference the federal rule setting forth the displaying of shoppable hospital services in a consumer-friendly manner. This is already law for federal government. This will permit OFLAC to enforce the federal requirements. The federal rule requires that a hospital, generally speaking, shall display at least 300 shoppable services that a healthcare consumer can schedule in advance. To comply, the hospital must contain plain language descriptions of the services and group them with ancillary services and provide the discounted cash prices, payer-specific negotiated charges, and de-identified minimum and maximum negotiated charges. If a hospital is not compliant, it is subject to a civil fine from OFLAC. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now before the House is shall the bill pass. Gentleman of the 25th, Delegate Hornbuckle, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the chair lady please yield? Yes. Thank you. So with this piece of legislation before us, what are we doing differently that's already currently done?
This is a federal rule, and the state is now going to make sure that our hospitals are following the federal rule. Some of them are not. If they choose not to, and our consumers cannot look up what charges would be charged of them when they're selecting a service, then we're allowing a civil fine from OFLAC to occur.
So to be clear, some of our hospitals are not following this rule currently.
That is correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there other debate on this bill? Does the lady wish to close debate on the bill? Lady from the 73rd. If not, the question is, shall the bill pass? Those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. We have 98 ayes, 0 nays, and 2 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5530 relating to requiring a hospital to disclose price and fee information for certain health care services.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Ladies and gentlemen, are there objections at this time to returning to further consideration of House Bill 4855 for the purposes of a title amendment? No objections are heard. Clerk will please report House Bill 4855.
House Bill 4855 require Division of Purchasing to write contracts in an unbiased manner.
Are there title amendments?
Delegate Burkhammer moves to amend the title.
The question is on the adoption of the title amendment. Those in favor of adoption of the title amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. The chair declares that title amendment adopted. The title of the bill as amended by the House will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Now on to the next bill on third reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5539, providing that causes of action under Chapter 46A of the Code of West Virginia survive the death of the party.
Are there objections to having this bill explained in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman from 51st to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The purpose of this bill is to provide that causes of action under West Virginia Credit and Protection Act shall survive the death of the party. The committee substitute amends the definition of consumer in Chapter 46A to include estate administrators and other persons obligated under a deed of trust or lien that secures certain property that is subject to foreclosure or forfeiture. It amends the code to clarify that any violation of Chapter 46A, which is the West Virginia Consumer Credit and Protection Act, will survive the death of the claimant. That's a summary, Mr. Speaker. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question before the House is, shall the bill pass? Is there a debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result. On that question, there were 98 ayes, 0 nays, and 2 members absent. A majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares the bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5539, providing that causes of action under Chapter 46A of the Code of West Virginia survive the death of the party.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Next bill on third reading.
House Bill 5696, relating to the Upper Ohio Valley Trail Network.
Are there objections to having the bill explained in lieu of having the bill read? If not, gentleman, the 11th, I could Fehrenbacher to explain the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. House Bill 5696 assigns Wood County the place of the Mountaineer Trail Network Recreation Authority as the lead member of the Upper Ohio Valley Trail Network Recreation Authority. Wood County will assume primary responsibility for establishing the Upper Ohio Valley Trail Network and for coordinating linkages between it and the Mountaineer Trail Network Recreation Authority. I urge passage.
You've heard the bill explained. The question now is, shall the bill pass? Gentleman of the 34th, Douglas Dean, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Is this a motorized or non-motorized trail?
Non-motorized, pedestrian, non-motorized bikes, and could be used for like streams, canoeing, and kayaking, and things like that.
No ATVs or UTVs?
Not to my knowledge, not with the current charge.
Okay, thank you.
Question still is, shall the bill pass? Is there debate on the bill? Is there debate on the bill? If not, those in favor of passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? If so, the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on this question. There were 92 ayes, 5 nays, and 3 members absent. Majority of members having voted in the affirmative, the chair declares that bill passed. The clerk will please report the title.
House Bill 5696, relating to the Upper Ohio Valley Trail Network.
Are there title amendments? If not, the title as read by the clerk will be and remain the title of the bill. The clerk will please communicate the action of the House to the Senate. Are there other bills on third reading? If not, bills on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 631, prohibiting municipalities from disconnecting water service for non-payment of stormwater fees.
Are there amendments?
Delegates Fast, Riley, and Hardy move to amend the bill.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Chair recognizes the gentleman to 72nd, Douglas Riley, to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment inserts language that passed out of the Judiciary Committee on House Bill 4864. It essentially does 2 items. First, it requires that a municipal stormwater utility form a municipal stormwater appeals board and allows for new applicants that may appeal their estimated residential usage or equivalent dwelling usage to the appeal board. The second item is if there is a shutoff of water service for non-payment of stormwater utility, the utility must meet 5 conditions. 1, the water service and stormwater service must be in the name of the same user. 2, the charges incurred must be 90 days past due. 3, the provider has gotten a written notice of termination at least 10 days in advance prior to the termination and offer to enter a deferred payment plan. 4, the provider has attempted to make personal contact at least 2 times 24 hours prior to the termination. And 5, if they've entered into a deferred payment plan, they must be out of compliance with that payment plan in order to terminate service. I urge adoption.
You've heard the amendment explained. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on this amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. Ayes appear to have it. Ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for Senate Bill 754, allowing car dealerships to utilize search engines to determine if buyers have valid motor vehicle insurance.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4507, creating a tax credit for improving facades in historic districts.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Sheedy moves to amend the bill. On page 2, section 12O, line 30, by striking the word curator and inserting in lieu thereof the following: secretary. And on page 4, section 23H, line 30, by striking out the word curator and inserting in lieu thereof the following: secretary.
You've heard the amendment read by the clerk. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on this amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption, yes, Gentleman 12, Doug, Chris.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. This amendment is fine. It goes along with the bill and also goes along with the curator to the arts and cultural history. So I urge adoption.
Is there other debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill?
Delegate Foster moves to amend the bill.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard. Gentleman 20th to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this bill, we have a historic tax credit in our code that was allowed, and this would allow it all to apply to facades. And this language that's in my amendment just basically says that anybody that receives this tax credit can't be in arrears of taxes, and provides for, in the rulemaking, that they can set up the rules or information that needed to be provided to ensure that nobody was in arrears of taxes.
You've heard the amendment explained. Is there debate on the amendment? Gentleman 12th, Doug, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I urge adoption. Thank you very much.
Is there other debate on the amendment? Is there other debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4548, relating to authorizing application of the Manufacturing Investment Tax Credit and the Manufacturing Property Tax Adjustment Credit against personal income tax.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 4549, relating to consumers' sales and service tax and use tax exemption for certain goods to be incorporated into a qualified new or expanded warehouse or distribution facility.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Revised committee substitute for House Bill 4621, relating to the Division of Corrections and Rehabilitation posting booking photographs of an accused person.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4667, prohibiting syringe services programs from distributing listed smoking devices.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 4700, banning certain persons from sports wagering activities.
Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be advanced to third reading with a general right to amend.
Are there objections? No objections are heard. The bill will be so advanced. Next bill on second reading.
House Bill 4744, requiring certain non-discretionary procedures be strictly complied with by the West Virginia Parkways Authority before tolls, rents, fees, or charges may be increased.
Are there amendments?
The Committee on Government Organization moves to amend the bill on page 3, section 13, line 54, after the period, by inserting the words, "Credit card payments shall be accepted at toll booths in lieu of a cash payment with no additional fees related to processing."
You've heard the amendment read by the clerk. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4753 relating to providing health insurance coverage concerning biomarker testing.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Summers moves to amend the bill.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read? Lady from the 73rd to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment does two things. First, it changes PEIA and puts Bureau of Medical Services in one line where they made a mistake. And secondly, 1 year following implementation of this bill, Medicaid and PEIA will give a report to the Joint Committee on Government and Finance to show the cost of the program. That way we'll know how much it costs. Can we expand it? Do we need to keep it where it is? So I urge adoption.
You've heard the amendment explained. Is there debate on the amendment? Is there debate on the amendment? If not, those in favor of adoption of this amendment will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Clerk will please report the next amendment.
Delegate Garcia moves to amend the bill on page 1 following the enacting clause by striking out the remainder of the bill and inserting in lieu thereof the following.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain the amendment in lieu of having it read in full? No objections are heard, and the gentleman from the 76th, Delegate Garcia, is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So this amendment here, with respect to biomarkers, the bill as it was introduced really had a broad effect on a number of different diseases as far as using biomarker testing to try to help with diagnosis and to also help with treatment of different diseases, to try to exact in on those types of treatments that are actually going to be effective, that are going to be efficient. The way the bill has been changed, and first of all, this is a bill that has been presented by the gentleman from the 16th, who I have so much respect for as a colleague. And I think the bill as it has come out of committee, there is a strategic decision as far as how we can get something passed that's going to do good for people in the state of West Virginia. So I don't know that this is so much about a substantive debate on what would be the best thing for patients that may be diagnosed with cancer, may be diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, may be diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, or maybe on the cusp of trying to find out whether these or other types of diseases are things that can be understood and can be cured or treated to some degree. I think this is more about some of the issues that insurance companies have had that they brought to the forefront. But we had the committee substitute as it came out. There were a number of different issues that were raised in banking and insurance and in the Judiciary Committee. And in the Judiciary Committee, we had an amendment that took it back to the original bill. And in reality, some of the language relates in the committee substitute to prior authorization. That's something that insurers talked about wanting. There were issues that were brought up about federal Medicaid. What if there's no matching funds? Would it still have to be paid for? There was language that really, I think, kind of confused the idea or talked about post-diagnostic treatment as opposed to, I think, a very genuine concern as far as not having just screenings using this type of biomarker testing, so that, screening kind of being, hey, let's just give it to everybody,
and we'll see if we can find if there are certain diseases, rather than in connection with trying to diagnose a disease. And there are some things there's some types of diseases that without this biomarker testing, you will never have a diagnosis until somebody may have passed away. And for all these reasons, the groups that start off as supporting this bill, groups supporting treatments for cancer, again, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, lots of others, have really withdrawn their support for the current piece of legislation that we have in front of us. So what this amendment does is try to mix the initial intent for this bill with the concerns, the genuine concerns that were raised by the insurance industry. So really it does four things. The first is it adds a definition of precision diagnosis so that it narrows the scope of the diagnoses that these biomarker testings will be used for. Definition in here, precision diagnosis means the use of biomarker testing to confirm a suspected disease or condition, or after a covered individual has received a medical diagnosis of a disease or condition for which biomarker testing is appropriate. So that does, and then specifically too, the second thing, it adds no screening language. And so nothing in this section shall require coverage of biomarker testing for the purpose of screening an individual prior to initiating diagnostic testing or care for a disease or condition for which biomarker testing is appropriate. Insurers wanted prior authorization, so we took it back, but we put that back in the bill. We made sure that that's in there. And finally, it adds that Medicaid matching language would not be jeopardized, so if biomarker testing shall be covered subject to the availability of federal matching funds. So the effort right here with this amendment is, because in judiciary, again, we went back to it was really a vote about, do we use this committee substitute or do we go back to the original bill? This tries to get more in depth on figuring out if we can deal with the concerns of insurance companies versus the concerns of the many groups who are trying to do a better job to not only, again, diagnose many of these conditions, which are better treated early on, but also to get to the specific types of treatment. For example, with cancer, if you can use biomarker testing in connection with somebody who you know that has cancer, you can try to get at what type of cancer they have. Maybe it's spread from one part of the body to the other, but there are certain treatment at that point in time that's going to be more effective. And I think that one of the main concerns with this type of legislation, anytime you require PEIA, you require Medicaid, and you require private insurers to pay for something, is it's going to cost more. But in reality, many of the treatments we have and the use of these biomarkers can help cut these costs and make sure that we're not inefficiently or wastefully treating somebody, and hopefully that we're going to get to a better outcome. So that is my amendment. I'm happy, even though I'm not a doctor, to answer these questions as best I can, and I would appreciate your support on the amendment. Thank you.
You've heard the amendment explained. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on the amendment? Gentleman from the 16th, I got Westfall is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The gentleman from 76 yields for question.
Yes, gentleman does yield.
Yes. So your amendment is pretty much the original bill with a couple caveat, like pre-authorization, a couple things added, correct?
Yes, it goes back to the original bill, but then it tries to take some of the language that was put in the committee substitute, but do it in such a way where it's not going to prohibit some of the main things that these groups were looking for in trying to use the biomarker testing.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman to 66, Douglas Nestor.
No, Mr. Speaker, speak to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized. We'll get to
Thank you,
gentleman
Mr.
66
Speaker.
next.
I'm the lead sponsor of this bill. This bill came from NCOIL. I actually chaired the National Council of Insurance Legislature's Health Committee when this bill passed in 2023. It's a model legislation, and I bring a lot of legislation from NCOIL to the House. We've passed probably half a dozen or more NCOIL model bills in the last 3 or 4 years. Like you say, it's a model legislation that different states take up. Every state's different, and we're unique in our way, maybe not a good way. We're unique that we got about 750,000 people either on Medicaid or PIA. And with those, only about 23% is commercial insurance. Commercial insurance covers what the gentleman's amendment would do. I worked on this with several people since day one the session started. Actually last October, I started working on this bill. I hoped that we could do post and pre-diagnosis, but because of the cost, we cannot. Biomarkers are relatively new. My bill, as it is right now, the committee's substitute, is post-diagnosis only. So if a person gets a disease, and it's any disease, it's not just cancer, a person, let's use cancer, a person gets cancer, the insurance company will be required, Medicaid, PIA, and the private pay, to pay for a diagnostic test to see what your best path forward for treatment, hopefully cure, or at least some help to give you maintaining some good life. I wish we could do some pre-diagnosis, but we cannot afford it in West Virginia. This is new. This is my last session, but if this passes without this amendment, hopefully someday you can look back and say, okay, now we can pay for this. Now we can do some pre-diagnosis. Some of the biomarker testing we've heard range, some of them $25, $50. There's also some $3,000 ones. There's some $1,800 ones. There's some $121 ones, $409 ones, $400, $3,000, $2,000, $400. The average cost probably about $2,000. This is for post-diagnosis. I wish I could stand up and say I support his amendment, because that was my original bill. But we cannot in West Virginia support this right now. So for all due respect, I urge rejection of the amendment.
Gentleman from 66, Doug Nestor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentleman from the 76 yield for a couple questions, please?
Yes, sir.
So when you were explaining your amendment, you talked about taking some portions of the original introduced bill and hopefully trying to insert those in the committee substitute, which we are deliberating about today. Is that right?
So actually, it goes back to the original bill, but some of the items that were placed in the committee substitute were put into the language of the original bill. So we're taking, I think, some of the concerns that were brought up and trying, but going back to the real intended meaning behind, again, I understand what the gentleman said from the 16th, and I would say, again, we're not doing screening, and we're specifically talking about making sure that it's not just a screen or some type of generational test, or I'm sorry, genetic testing, but this is to be used either when there's diagnosis going on, when they're trying to get to the answer to figure out what something is, or when they're trying to figure out how to treat something and really do, again, this more precision diagnosis and precision treatment.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So your amendment would mandate that insurance companies pay for biomarker testing pre-diagnosis when there's a reasonable suspicion by a licensed physician that there's a medical issue that is being assessed. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, and the definition, just to make sure that I'm being very clear, is to confirm a suspected disease or condition. That's one, or after a covered individual has received a medical diagnosis of a disease or condition for which it's appropriate. And there are also things in here that talk about you can't just do it for anything. There are scientific guidelines that are involved and definitions that have to be met. So, a covered individual could have this type of treatment, this type of diagnostic tool denied if it doesn't meet that criteria there.
And is it your understanding, if the bill passes without your amendment, that biomarker testing is only going to be obligated to be compensated by insurance companies for patients post-diagnosis? Is that right?
Yes, and again, I think one of the main issues with that is some of these items, they have trouble even diagnosing them at all or having a firm diagnosis.
Yes. I thank you, sir. Permission to speak to the bill?
The gentleman is recognized.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to vote for the bill because I trust the gentleman from the 16th testimony that this is the best that we're going to get. I would say that I'd like to see us do better in the future. I think West Virginia, the health of West Virginians is our responsibility. I think it's a big responsibility. It's something to be paramount in our legislature. I hate the fact that the bill, we can't afford to pay for pre-diagnosis biomarking testing or obligate such insurance companies to do so. I heard testimony in Judiciary Committee that only 23% of West Virginians are insured through a private insurance agency. So that leaves 77% of us either on PIA, Medicaid, or some other form of insurance. And I understand it's a financial burden. I would have liked to have seen, I'm going to vote for the bill, like I said, but I really think that the bill could be improved. So I'm going to be voting for the gentleman's amendment, and if it fails, I'm still going to vote for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from the 51st, Douglas Fast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would just like to read two variations of the definition of precision diagnosis. In the committee substitute, precision diagnosis means the use of biomarker testing after a covered individual has received a medical diagnosis of a disease or conditions for which biomarker testing is appropriate. In the gentleman's amendment, here is the definition of precision diagnosis. It means the use of biomarker testing to confirm a suspected disease or condition, or after a covered individual has received a medical diagnosis. In addition, Mr. Speaker, I would like to point out in the gentleman's proposed amendment, it states that the Bureau for Medical Services shall provide coverage for biomarker testing for the purposes of precision diagnosis, treatment, and it goes on. And then down in the bottom it states, biomarker testing shall be covered subject to the availability of matching funds. So the language that the Bureau for Medical Services shall provide coverage is coupled with biomarker testing shall be covered subject to the availability of federal matching funds. We discussed this whole issue of pre-diagnosis or post-diagnosis ad nauseum in the Judiciary Committee, and I mean, it was regretful that we passed the bill out the way it was, but it was abundantly clear that if we didn't pass it out the way it was, there would be nothing for anyone. And so, having said that, Mr. Speaker, I would respectfully urge rejection of the gentleman's proposed amendment and a yea vote on the bill, the committee substitute. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question still is on the adoption of the amendment. Lady, or gentleman from the 100th, I got right now is recognized.
Will the sponsor of the bill please stand for question?
Yes, sir.
Was there any kind of fiscal analysis of what the cost will be for the current version of the bill?
There was no physical note done, but we've seen some other states, physical notes. Maryland was $27 million. Nevada was $420 million.
How much, please? I'm sorry.
$420 million.
In which?
Nevada. The physical note, they passed this legislation already and have it in effect. That was a physical. We did not request a physical note. The PIA, the current version, thinks the cost up front it will saving because it'll be more direct care or more direct medical for the person. In other words, if I have cancer, what type of cancer, my biomarker will say this is the way path forward, so it'll be cheaper instead of trying 3 different things, 4 different things. So there's no physical note, but we've seen some other states, and the physical note been a lot higher than what they thought.
Okay, very good. Will the sponsor of the amendment yield for? Were you, given what the sponsor of the bill had to say relative to the current version, what do you think the impacts will be, the fiscal impacts will be for your amendment? It seems like it would be larger, but I wanted to get your assessment, or if you had done any kind of analysis.
So I'll be honest, I have not done, or I've not received any type of fiscal analysis. What I do know is the other 14 states that have passed this bill, this type of bill that was an in-coil bill, they did so with the original version that we had. And so I believe that to the extent that we have seen these increased fiscal notes in other states, that part of what this amendment tries to do is balance. It tries to take the concerns that we've had. Again, the pre-approval, I think, is a big point. And again, that's something we heard up in the Judiciary Committee from insurance companies. And I also think some of the language in here with respect to Medicaid and other things, it's trying to look at those possible factors because, and come to some type of, again, make this a bill that does something very important, but understands that there are some unknown variables out there. I do think, though, and from what I've heard from some people in different medical professions, and also some of the organizations supporting this bill, is that although right now, some of this biomarker testing can be more expensive, the treatment, to the extent that it can identify what's needed or can prevent somebody from going years and years not being diagnosed or being misdiagnosed, that's got to be a way that we could actually, I think, lessen the fiscal impact, and it should make it for a more efficient process. When I say that, I'm saying so anecdotally. So, but I hope that answers your question the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there other debate on the amendment? If not, gentlemen, to 76 to close debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for this debate. Again, this is one of the bills that got me really, really excited at the beginning of session, and I appreciate the gentleman from the 16th in introducing the bill and being a huge part of it, for him letting me be a sponsor of the bill. I know people that have had cancer and Parkinson's, Alzheimer's is another one that hits close. And I get the idea of wanting to do something to try to figure out what's going to pass, to try to figure out what we can do to make a couple of things better for people. And, when you weigh things, I think, money is important, but time is very important for the people that have a loved one in their life that's affected by these different diseases. And so the longer we wait for a type of testing that is here right now, the less chance somebody is going to get that diagnosis in time, the less of a chance that somebody's going to be able to prevent or extend their life for some period of time. And I think about weighing those things. And I think and sometimes, you guys have heard me talk before, sometimes my heart weighs, I think, a little bit more than my mind. I try to balance them the best I can. But wow, for those people that this could affect and that could do so quickly, I think there's the real opportunity not just to help people get to better outcomes, but to save money. That's the whole point of this. That if somebody's taking so long to get diagnosed, and we've all probably had family members or ourselves have gone through situations where we knew something was wrong, we didn't know what it was. When I was 19 years old, so I was at WVU, and it was my second year, first semester of the second year. And I started having this pain in my side. And I didn't know what it was. Honestly, I thought I drank some orange vodka one night and I felt really sick. And it just kind of kept getting worse. And it kept getting worse. I remember telling friends of mine, at one point, I was kind of embarrassed to go to class. I always had this huge noise that would, when I would sit down in class, I remember having a pretty girl right next to me, and all of a sudden, just hoping, and all of a sudden this huge sound happened, and it was just one of the pretty embarrassing things. And at one point, I remember I lost about 30 pounds. And I was down about 120. And I remember seeing my mom at Thanksgiving, and we, still didn't know what this was. We were trying to figure out what it was. It turned out to be Crohn's disease, which I've had, and I've been very lucky. I got on a medication back then that's been able to keep me healthy. and, you know, really live my dreams that I've had. So I was lucky. So the only reason because this isn't about that, but it gave me the opportunity to understand how scary it can be to not know and hope that there's some help out there. And so for people that I know that have gone through cancer, people that are trying to figure out, especially with early Alzheimer's and some of the great neurological work that's being done at WVU and other places. With Parkinson's, a really good friend of mine, George Manahan, has been such a great advocate for the Michael J. Fox Foundation. And again, when these people are telling me that this bill, as we've amended it, they would rather not have it because that precludes the possibility of moving forward with something that can do some real good. And sometimes we have to fight that urge, I think, that we just want to pass something. We want to accomplish small steps. Sometimes that's a way to break through, but this is about time. And this is about what that time can mean to somebody who's close to you. So for that reason, I hope you support this amendment. Thank you.
Gentleman's closed debate on the amendment. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption of the amendment will please say aye. Aye. Those opposed will please say no. No. No's appear to have it. Roll call is demanded. Is the demand sustained? Demand is sustained. The question is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption of the amendment will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. The clerk will prepare the machine. Has every member voted? So the clerk will close the machine and ascertain the result on that question. There are 22 ayes, 71 nays, 7 members absent. Less than a majority in the affirmative. The chair declares that amendment lost. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4829 relating to employment of service personnel and removing the requirement for a high school diploma or general education development certificate.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4882 extending in-state tuition rates to all members and veterans of the National Guard, Reserves, and Armed Forces, as well as their spouses and dependents.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4952 relating to time frame of service of notice.
Bill will be advanced. Are there amendments? Bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 4963 prohibiting the use of deepfake technology to influence an election.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5025 to repeal the additional 1.5% interest rate for underpayments and specify an effective date.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5062 relating to allowing a guardian ad litem to request the appointment of a court-appointed special advocate.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5130 relating to criminal trespass.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5134, deceased disabled veteran real property exemption for widowed spouses.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5151 relating to defining term fictive kin.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5162 establish a program to promote creation and expansion of registered apprenticeship programs.
Are there amendments?
Delegate Kraus moves to amend the bill on page 1, section A, line 3, after the word public by removing private or home.
You've heard the amendment read by the clerk. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Is there debate on the amendment? Lady from the 19th, Delegate Kraus, to open debate on the amendment.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I believe there may be a competing amendment with that.
For the benefit of all members, there is not. There are two primary amendments to the bill, as well as a comprehensive substitute strike and insert amendment which would replace the bill. So at this time, the question is on the ladies' amendment. Ladies recognized to open debate.
I'll ask unanimous consent to pull my amendment.
To withdraw the amendment?
withdraw
Are
the
there
amendment,
objections
yes.
to having this amendment withdrawn? No objections are heard. This amendment will be withdrawn. Clerk will please report the next of the primary amendments.
Delegate Worrell moves to amend the bill on page 2, subsection 3, line 19, by striking out 400 and inserting in lieu thereof 1,000.
You've heard the amendment read by the clerk. The question now is, shall the amendment be adopted? Shall recognize the sponsor, Gentleman 23rd, to open debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to withdraw my amendment.
Are there objections to having this amendment withdrawn? No objections are heard, and that amendment will be withdrawn. So okay, clerk will please report now the last of the amendments.
Delegate Young moves to amend the bill on page 1 following the enacting clause by striking out the remainder of the bill and inserting in lieu thereof the following.
Are there objections to allowing the sponsor to explain this amendment in lieu of having it read? There are no objections heard. Lady from the 56th is recognized to explain this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am not withdrawing this amendment. This amendment does encompass the amendment from the lady from the 19th, not my friend from Cabell, though, sorry. But it is just it honestly provides clarity. I'm changing absolutely nothing substantive, just restructured the amendment a little bit to make it make a little more sense, but the bill still does the exact same thing. So I hope you'll support it.
Question now is on the amendment as explained by the sponsor. Gentleman the 38th, Delegate Ellington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment offered by the delegate clarifies the intent of the bill and does no harm to what was originally proposed. We have conferred with the sponsor of the bill, and he believes the same. For that reason, Mr. Speaker, I support the amendment.
Is there other debate on the amendment? Is there other debate on the amendment? If not, the question is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5178, requiring car dealerships in this state to utilize a search engine to determine if buyers of vehicles have valid motor vehicle insurance.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5237, prohibiting driving slow in left lane except under certain circumstances.
Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be advanced to third reading with a general right to amend.
Gentlemen, ask unanimous consent to advance the bill to third reading with a general right to amend. Are there objections? No objections are heard, and the bill will be so advanced. Next bill on second reading.
House Bill 5280, West Virginia's Short Line Railroad Modernization Act.
Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the bill be advanced to third reading with a general right to amend.
Gentlemen, ask unanimous consent to advance the bill to third reading with a general right to amend. Are there objections? No objections are heard, and the bill will be so advanced. Next bill on second reading.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5355, allowing volunteer fire departments to use fire protection funding for certain purchases.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5399 to modify the state auditing practices of the volunteer and part volunteer fire departments.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5425 relating to clarifying the amount of experience required in the hiring of professional education personnel.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5430 relating to per diem compensation and expenses of newly elected or appointed judicial officers receiving education and training prior to taking the oath of office.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5435, establishing the registered apprenticeship to Associate of Applied Science program to be administered by the Council for Community and Technical College Education.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5516, relating to criminalizing the use of deep fakes.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5548, relating to modifying requirements imposed on any owner, operator, or manager within a tourism development district.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5565, relating to requiring the Division of Motor Vehicles to provide an identification card for eligible released inmates.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
Committee substitute for House Bill 5572, prohibiting cameras and recording devices in bedrooms and bathrooms of foster children.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5613, relating to requiring the governor to establish crisis preparedness plans.
Are there amendments? If not, the bill will be advanced.
House Bill 5697, relating to public charter schools code provisions.
Are there amendments?
Delegate W. Clark moves to amend the bill on page 4, subsection 6, line 84, by adding the following, after the word requirements, public charter school teachers shall be permitted to proctor state assessments in the event they are not certified or licensed.
Questions on the amendment just read by the clerk. Chair will recognize the sponsor, the gentleman from the 99th, Doug Clark, to open debate on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a clarification. When we passed the charter schools, we allowed for them to have certified teachers. And when we got to the GSA last year, we had many issues in regards to who could actually issue the general substantive assessment test. And one of the reasons why is because in state board policy 2340, it actually states that all individuals who are giving the test must have a state license, which even includes substitute teachers. So this amendment was actually presented to me through our state charter school board, and it clarifies that up so that when we get to our state testing this year, we don't have that same issue we did last year, and I urge adoption.
Question now is on the amendment just read by the clerk and explained by the sponsor. Gentleman at 38th, Doug Ellington, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment offered does no harm to the bill. It is also in line with the rest of what is being proposed in the bill. Therefore, for that reason, Mr. Speaker, I support the amendment.
Is there other debate on the amendment? Is there other debate on the amendment? If not, the question is, shall the amendment be adopted? Those in favor of adoption will please say aye. Those opposed will please say no. The ayes have it. Chair declares that amendment adopted. Are there other amendments to the bill? If not, the bill will be advanced to third reading. Are there other bills on second reading? If not, the House will stand at ease just a moment. House will again be in order. Gentleman 96th.
Mr. Speaker, I move, subject to announcements, that the House recess until 4 p.m. tonight.
Are there announcements? Gentleman 96th.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, just a general announcement to our members that it's the intention that we will meet back tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m. But I'll make that announcement later this evening as well.
Gentleman 12th, Dr. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Finance will meet at 2:45 in the committee room. The agenda will be posted. Republican members will caucus in 30 minutes following the floor session. And again, the agenda is posted. Thank you.
Gentleman 8th, Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Judiciary Committee will meet today at 3 o'clock, and Republicans will caucus in the Chairman's office at 2:30. The agenda is posted. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman 1st, Dr. McGeehan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Government Organization will meet today at 2:30 in the Government Organization Committee Room. Republicans caucus in the Chair's office in 10 minutes. The agenda is posted.
Gentleman 43rd, Dr. Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Education will meet today at 3:30 in the Education Committee Room. The agenda is posted. Additionally, Republican members will caucus in the Chairman's office at 3:15.
Gentleman 99th, Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Economic Development and Tourism will meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. in the House Judiciary Room for the purpose of a presentation.
Are there other announcements? If not, the questions on the motion that the House stand in. Yes, Gentleman 94, they're going to come. House will be in order.
Just briefly, I wanted to make an announcement. Yesterday, my wife, my beloved and bodacious wife Cheryl, was taken by an ambulance to the Martinsburg Hospital. She's home now. I appreciate those of you who knew about it, your comments and condolences. She's doing a little better. She asked me, I said, I'll stay home. And she said, no, you need to fulfill your oath of office and be there. Nevertheless, I might have to go at a moment's notice, and I appreciate your faith and prayers on her behalf.
Gentleman, the 24th, Doug Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your subcommittee on honorary name resolutions will meet at 2:30 today in room 150.
Are there other announcements? Are there other announcements? If not, the questions on the motion that the House stand in recess until 4 o'clock. Those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The House is in recess until 4 o'clock.